us if you'd like some.
We got Okay, we're going to start the meeting. Good morning, everyone. This is the Grand Traverse County Ways and Means Committee. This committee makes the recommendations to the full board at the end of the month, the last Wednesday at 7 p.m. If you have a cell phone, please put it on vibrate or silent. We will call the meeting to order. We'll start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll stand and do the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Linda, if you can do the roll call attendance, please.
Commissioner Wheelock.
Yes, ma'am.
Stepka.
Here.
Richardson.
Here.
Baxbauer. Here. Hooper.
Here.
Friend. Here. Fleece.
Present.
Thomas.
Here.
Chairman Inman.
Here. Next item is the first public comment. Does any member of the public wish to speak at this time? Hearing none, we will close public comment. Now we have the approval of the agenda. Dennis, item number 4 under receive and file, since that's a recommendation for approval, should we move that to B, the B section? Unless the commissioner wants to pull that for further discussion.
I'm going to pull it anyway, so.
All right, let's just pull that and put that under item
7.
Item 7. E. We'll just put that under E, number 7. Okay. So that takes 4 out of the receiving file. So we need an approval to,
Mr. Chairman?
for the agenda.
Just a note, I'd like to recognize, and Dean's not here this morning, and I'm sure we'll have opportunity again, this Certificate of Achievement and Excellence in Finance and Reporting.
Yes.
This is 4 years in a row Grand Traverse County's received that. That's a pretty prestigious award throughout this country. So, you know, I think it recognizes the professionalism of our staff.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve the consent calendar as amended.
Moved by Wheelock.
I don't think we're
Yes.
there yet, are we?
Pardon?
We're at approval of the
We have to read
agenda.
it.
We're at the approval of the
Yeah.
agenda.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
We're at the approval of the agenda, not the consent calendar.
Approve the agenda then.
Okay, moved by Wheelock,
Second.
second by Richardson. Discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, passes. Now we will move on to the consent calendar. Linda, if you could read the consent calendar, moving item 4 to item number 7, so that item number 7E, item number 7. Okay.
The purpose of the consent calendar is to expedite business by grouping non-controversial items together to be dealt with by one commission motion without discussion. Any member of the commission, staff, or the public may ask that any item on the consent calendar be removed therefrom and placed elsewhere on the agenda for full discussion. Such requests will be automatically respected. If any item is not removed from the consent calendar, the action noted receive and file or approval is approved by a single committee action adopting the consent calendar. All information identified in the consent calendar can be viewed in its entirety at www.grandtraverse.org. A. Receive and file. 1. Ways and Means Committee minutes of January 19, 2010. 2. Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Finance reporting, January 25, 2010. 3. EDC Revolving Loan Fund Semi-Annual Update. 4 has been removed from the consent calendar. 5. Document Imaging Update. 6. General Fund January 2010 Trial Balance and General Fund Revenue and Expenditure Summaries. 7. Child Care Fund. B. Approve. 1. Purchase Internet Web Filtering Security Appliance. 2. Purchase of Storage Expansion and Server Memory. 3. Land Information Access Association Contract Renewal. 4. Grant acceptance from Department of Energy for $250,000. 5. Budget adjustments. And 6. Appropriation requests.
Okay. Does any member of the public wish to poll any of the consent items? Hearing none, does any board member wish to pull a consent item? Yes, Commissioner Richardson.
Well, it's sort of a technical point, but I think the minutes from January 19th is something we need to approve rather than just receive and file. So in other words, move it
Yep.
from Section A to Section B.
All right. That'll be fine. Make that note. Okay, we'll make that item number 7 under approve. Yeah, that's a good catch. Any other items to pull or discuss? Consent calendar? Hearing none, let's have a motion to approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Second.
All right, moved by Commissioner Wee, second by Commissioner Richardson to approve the consent calendar as presented. Moving item number 1 under receive and file to approve. Of course, we move the MERS retirement hybrid plan to discussion. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Stepka?
Yes.
Richardson?
Yes.
Max Bauer?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Chairman Inman.
Yes. All right. Consent calendar is approved. It's presented. Moving to item number 7, department action items. A, equalization. Is Lori going to address that? Okay, Lori, come on up. Morning.
Good morning. We had numerous letters on file from various departments, many of our townships, emergency management for new aerials. We went out to the tribe to seek some funding from their 2% grants, and were successful partially in getting the 2% grant. So I would, I guess, seek both to have the 2% funding, grant funding approved or accepted, and allow us to go forward in purchasing the aerials. One of the things that this will accomplish, the aerials will be taken in a census year, which is very important. And 911 utilizes the aerials in their system and would also like to see the updated aerials in their system with a lot of the new construction that we've had in the county.
Okay. Commissioner Wheelock.
I'll make the motion for discussion.
Support.
All right. Go ahead.
Dennis, have we identified the funding for this?
The balance of the funding would come from about $25,000 from the Register of Deeds fee line item. I still have to talk with the Register of Deeds because she gave her consent to do this, is my understanding, and I understand she's had some, since then had some reservation about it, and I have not had an opportunity to go down and see her. But my suggestion is that you approve it to go to the board as she had committed to the staff, and then I will verify that that commitment is in place for the board next week. You have any, Commissioner Richardson?
So originally, the request from the tribe was for $35,000,
Correct.
and they basically gave us $14,800.
When was the last time we did these maps, Lori?
The aerials, 2006.
Clarification, Commissioner Wheelock, was your motion to discuss the item? Is that what
Well,
you heard?
no, the motion was to accept the grant and
accept the grant, that's okay. We didn't hear
allocate
that.
money, but we
All
had
right.
to identify where that money was
Okay,
coming from.
so it's been moved by Wheelock, supported by Richardson to accept the grant.
No, it wasn't supported by me. it was
Or by
supported
Hooper.
by
Okay, I'm sorry. Commissioner Max Bauer.
Well, I would support the motion provided that the money does come out of the Register of Deeds office. I would not support the motion if it comes out of the general fund, so the fund balance.
My suggestion is that you make this motion contingent so that the motion would be to accept the grant and approve the project contingent on the $25,000 coming from the Register of Deeds Technical Fund. And then I will verify that for next week, and if that's not the case, then of course we'll have to pull it from the agenda.
My thought
Are you
would
fine
be
with
we can
that?
do whatever we want with the motion, or we will just, it'll automatically be pulled from the consent calendars for the identification of funds at the Board of Commissioners meeting.
Commissioner Friend.
What's the hesitation on using the technology fund?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
The last, John Syken and I actually met with Peggy, and that day, she didn't have any problem, but I haven't had a chance to talk to her either since then to know.
Let me just say that the Register has been extremely cooperative in using this fund to assist us in ways that both help her office and also can help other offices. So I don't anticipate a problem with it, but I just haven't had a chance to meet with her. So I will do that, and I fully expect that she'll be agreeable to using this money.
Thank you.
So are you fine with that scenario, Commissioner Wheelock, and the support from Hooper?
Yes.
All right. Any more discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could I ask if the board would have any interest in, Mr. Judson is here for item E2, the abrogation agreement for the airport, and, so that he doesn't have to sit through this whole meeting. Would it be possible to move that
Sure.
item up and take care of that now?
Sure. We'd be happy to do that. Morning, if you can get yourself introduced.
For the aviation easement?
Thank you. Good morning. I'm Chuck Judson. I serve as counsel to the Northwestern Regional Airport Commission, which is composed of Grand Traverse County and Leelanau County. And we're here before you today. I'm in place of Airport Director Steve Cassens, who's in Lansing today for some meetings with the Michigan Airport Executives meetings that are going on. What we have here is essentially a technical issue that has come up recently through some development opportunities that have occurred just south of South Airport Road. The developer who put together the Walgreens project learned in the process of that development that there was an easement relative to the airport at the time that had been put in place in 1944. And it was an easement that was established essentially to permit the airport, and it was granted to the city at the time, but to permit the location of poles and other navigational aids that would ultimately benefit a runway that was never developed. It is now a taxiway. The runways are more in a direct east-west, north-south alignment. We looked at that issue, and technically speaking, all of the property interests for the airport are held by Grand Traverse County and Leelanau County. And in order for us to abandon any property rights, there's a lengthy process to declare it as surplus under FAA rules and procedures. So we took a look at whether there was some benefit we could obtain, and in effect, the restrictions on the property were no longer a particular benefit to the operation of the airport or future development. But what we did not have was the opportunity to restrict airspace over this particular parcel. And in fact, there are 38 acres that are included in this, so it's well beyond just the parcel we're talking about. And it's basically in the corner of Garfield Avenue and South Airport on the south side near Dual Road. So as a consequence, we worked with the FAA and talked with our airport engineer, and we developed a proposal to restrict some airspace and to provide some restrictions on lighting and height and other elements that could, in the future, have a potential benefit for the airport. And so what we're proposing today is to have an amendment to this easement. The developer has agreed to pay the costs that are related to improving this. And the only issue, well, perhaps I'm without coffee, I'm heading into an issue. This is probably affecting about 4 acres of the 38. So as our discussions went forward with the FAA, what we suggested is that we would use this as a template, and then we'll be contacting the other property owners within that 38 acres. For whatever reason, as properties have been exchanged and developed south of South Airport Road, this easement has never come up before. There are actually several easements that were granted in the 1940s that affected this, but in the chain of title now, there are dozens of property owners that are impacted. So we intend to contact each of those property owners over the next year and suggest to them that we would go through this trade. Once we consolidate all the remaining properties, then we would bring those in a lump sum fashion. But what we're asking you today to do is to propose an amendment to the easement. It will be binding only on the property owners we're negotiating with right now. but we will be moving that matter forward with the other property owners, and the FAA does approve this.
If you could be a little more specific in terms of the direction you want us to go. The amendment to the easement specifically says what?
Well,
Or
we
you have something in writing that provides that?
Yes, we provide,
Got that one?
there is an amendment to the abrogation easement, which I believe was in your packet.
All right.
And it
116.
Okay.
basically recites the conditions and provides the restrictions that we are giving up and the restrictions that we'll be obtaining. And then we also prepared a general resolution that I think that Mr. Cooney approved.
And that'll be coming to the board next week.
Right, this is preliminary, I appreciate that.
Okay.
So an opportunity for any questions. I do have a map, if anybody would like to have me identify where this area is. It is a technical issue, but it formed an opportunity for us to actually protect some property interests as we started to think about it.
I did speak with Eric Clone, the administrator in Leelanau County, and they appear to be in agreement with this as well.
So is this something you want to bring back in your administrator's report? Are you looking for a motion to
No,
pass this resolution?
I think a motion to approve the easement to go to the board next week would be appropriate.
Okay. Commissioner Hooper.
I would move that we approve the amendment to aviation easement by the airport.
Moved by Commissioner Hooper, supported by Commissioner Fleece, to approve the amendment as presented. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you coming.
Good morning, Joe.
All right, we're going to move back to facilities. That would be item 7.
Danny's not here at the moment. Would it be possible to hold
Hold
off
that.
on that?
All right, we'll hold on that. Moving on to item C, treasurer. Bill? Morning.
Yeah, Bill Rokas, County Treasurer. What we have today is, what we had talked about last month is bringing you the resolution to approve the borrowing for the delinquent tax fund. I think at that meeting I did tell you that in this document it would give the maximum amount we'd borrow, but it's been so long since we borrowed, I didn't realize they don't do that anymore. And what they do now is in the borrowing resolution, it just gives you the authority to borrow up to the amount of the delinquent taxes. So there's not an actual number in here, but it is limited to the amount of the current year delinquent taxes that we could borrow. I'm still anticipating that it's going to be, could be anywhere from up to 6 million possibly. But even if it was that much, the borrowing still should be a short-term issue. Should be between 6 and a year, up to a year would probably be the most that we'd have to take this loan out for, so it'd be a very short term.
Commissioner Hooper.
Now, and when you talk about this too, isn't it possible that we could actually, by doing this, still make money through our taxes and the...
We'd still make money, yeah, but it is a taxable issue. It's not, we can't issue these type of notes as non-taxable anymore. We used to back when we were, the last time we borrowed, it was done as a non-taxable bond issue, but the federal government has changed those regulations, and now it's a taxable bond issue. But the rates would still be a lot lower than the interest that we're charging on the delinquent taxes.
Commissioner Wheelock.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we authorize the county treasurer to borrow money to pay the delinquent tax to the taxing entities.
Moved by Commissioner Wheelock, support by Commissioner Thomas. Discussion. Commissioner Friend.
Wasn't there a policy related to this you were updating?
I believe that's later on in the packet, but it's not necessarily related to this issue. I mean, it does have some relation, but not for the borrowing. And the other thing is, even though if we do pass this, we'll still do everything we can not to borrow. And I'll still look at all the options that we have. A lot of that will depend on one taxpayer.
Dennis.
I just want to point out to the board, this is different than all your other bond issues in that it will be the county treasurer, once you pass this, that decides the amount to be borrowed. It will not come back to the county board. Of course, he'll come back and report to you, what we ended up borrowing, but it's the county treasurer's discretion as to what is borrowed.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. All right. Item 2.
The next item, Bill, this is the one we talked about, isn't it?
No, yeah, for the tax administrative fund.
Yeah. The law allows for a tax administrative fund to be established for the actual borrowing, to manage the borrowing. And Bill, I asked that this be put on just so that the board be aware of it. Back in the 90s, the last time we borrowed in 1991, the law actually allows the treasurer to be paid extra to manage the borrowing. And I believe it's an amount that, it's in excess of $10,000. Last time, the county board authorized a $5,445 increase in bills paid to manage the borrowing. And that's the last time we borrowed. Bill is not looking for any additional money, or is not requesting any additional money at this time, but I wanted to point out to the board that it was added to his pay. Like in 1992, you made it part of his duties and added it to his pay, but of course it hasn't kept up with inflation. And I just wanted to point out the fact that he has every right to ask for that, but he has decided not to ask for any additional pay.
Okay.
So I just wanted to point that out to the board.
All right, thank you. Anything else on the treasurer's report?
Thank you for doing that, Bill.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it. We got to finance.
Well, we have 2009 closed, and starting on page 99, I've included on page 100 the trial balance for the general fund only to show, just in totals what the revenue control and expenditure control totals were, which are then followed up on pages 101 and 102 with a summary of, first, starting on page 101, a summary of the revenues. In this format is the budget is in the first column, the actual revenue is in the middle column, followed by a variance. And in the case of the revenues, bracketed amounts are items that came in under budget. And then on page 2 is a summary of the expenditures by department. Same format. The budget is in the first column. Actual expenditures are in the middle column, and then a variance. Since I've run you ahead to page 102, let's start with the expenditures. We came in under budget by $711,657 on the expenditure side. So the departments continue to do an excellent job living within the appropriation that the county board has allocated. And one of the reasons for that is, their mindset, but also the fact that we do have a line item budget. When claims come down to the finance committee, we make budget adjustments during the year to move funds around internally to make sure that we live within the budget. The commissioners that are on the finance committee know that the reports that come down do not show any overdrawn claims, with the exception of the claims that we pay in January, because we can't amend the budget after the fiscal year ends. If we could flip back then to page 101, the summary down at the bottom, the revenues is really probably, the biggest concern that I have at this point, because we did come in under the revenue forecast or budget by $1.1 million. That was offset in part by the expenditures being under budget by $711,000, but yet the bottom line, we did use fund balance in the amount of $430,000.30. That was under the amount that we budgeted. We had budgeted to use $497,000. So, we came in under what we planned on using, but nonetheless, we still came in with a use of fund balance in 2009. Going back up to the detail first, court revenues were down. And I'm not picking on anyone here by any means when I highlight some of the departments, but the district court, circuit court revenues Department 131, we're down 71,000 compared to what we had budgeted, and down quite a bit compared to actual revenues in 2008. The district court was also down 105,000. If you, to give them some credit though, if you flip the page, the last three items are the activity 982 and 983 are the related appropriations to both the circuit and district court. And on the expenditure side, those appropriations were under what we budgeted slightly, which helps offset the revenue variance. It's not quite enough to absorb that difference, but it does help offset those amounts. Cooperative extension, Department 257 was down 60,000. That's in large part due to the loss of state grant funding for the fourth quarter. Central dispatch revenues were down slightly. That's primarily the surcharge. We have an overpayment situation with one of the providers, and I recognize that the full impact of that when we closed the books in 2009. And then the corrections, the jail function, the collections and fees were down 103,000, which is slightly offset. If you turn the page, their expenditures were down by 66,000. So the jail activity as a whole, inmate counts were down, but revenues as a result were down also. On the bottom of page 101, I've indicated a few of the major items that contributed to the use of fund balance. They're not the only reason we use fund balance, because we did budget to use fund balance in 2009. But they're listed. Carrying the 0-3 program for the fourth quarter was a $65,000 item. Purchasing the sheriff department vehicles within their authorized budgets was a use of $75,000. We did appropriate additional funds to our insurance fund to cover our loss reserves with MMRMA. That was a $50,000 item. And then the OPEB or other post-employment benefits, we're on a pay-as-you-go basis with our retiree benefits for the groups that do have some type of a health benefit, and that required $12,000 over and above the $150,000 that was budgeted. So that's a $202,000 contribution, I guess, to that use of fund balance, those four items. I'm sure you have questions, and I will try my best to answer those.
Okay, Commissioner Maxbauer.
Dean, when I take a look at 101, the list of department descriptions is not equal to the department descriptions on page 102. And what really jumps out at me is, for instance, when you take a look at the front down 975, friend of the court, you're saying that $316,973 was budgeted, and the exact same amount was expended. Same thing for Parks and Rec, $333,901, expended $333,901. And there are other departments listed in here, and what jumps out at me is, first of all, there's no revenue listed on page 101 for these departments, and number two, they spent exactly what they were budgeted? I find that surprising. And if they did, they did, but...
Let me explain that situation. We have, there are fewer departments for revenues. There's not a direct match between the revenue departments and the expenditure departments. And the primary reason for that is, if you look at the first revenue item, it's non-departmental. And we record all of the property tax revenues in a... It's called non-departmental, but it really doesn't have a, we don't take those revenues and allocate them back to any specific department, finance, county administration, the county board. It's just the entire tax levy is in one department. There's no allocation. The friend of the court And you also mentioned Parks and Rec. Those are the appropriations that the county board establishes to fund a special revenue fund. Parks and Rec is a special revenue fund. It's a fund all by itself with its separate budget. And what we're showing here with these, and they're generally down in the 900 range, starting with 965, the law library. Those are appropriations that the general fund makes back to those other funds. The child care fund as well, 970 is included. That's $1 million appropriation. The appropriations are made on a quarterly basis, and we generally, and this is one of those things where we do have, I think, the ability going forward to look at those fourth quarter appropriations and maybe reduce them, or in some cases, the child care fund most notably, because of how the situation in those funds can change so dramatically. I report to this committee on a regular basis, but with the friend of the court, to answer the question, that was the amount that we appropriated for them to support their budget for 2009, and because it was made 4 times over the course of the year, that's why it's at 100%. We actually are accumulating a fund balance in the friend of the court. There was a use of fund balance in Parks and Recreation. Child care fund, we just broke even. So with the appropriations, it's based on, the initial or amended appropriation is set by the board.
And then if you'll recall, during the budget, what Dean and I do is we look at whatever the fund balance is in those individual funds, and we try to appropriate that to offset the amount of general fund money that has to go. So we try to manage those fund balances in those funds so that we're not building up too large of a fund balance.
Go ahead.
For instance, we rent Twin Lakes out for weddings, whatever, graduations. It's a beautiful spot. Where is that revenue in here?
Those revenues are accounted for in Fund 208, the separate fund that's for Parks and Recreation activities. That's not included in this analysis, other than the appropriation to the Parks and Rec Fund, which is Department 974.
This is if you look at the top of both pages, this is an evaluation of the general fund. So if you want evaluations of the individual funds by program, you'll have to ask Dean to do that.
I can
He
do that
separately.
I certainly don't want to overwhelm you with information, but I'd be more than happy to provide that.
Perhaps if there are certain funds that the commissioners have questions about, if you get those to Dean, then we'll provide you the detail of those funds, rather than go through every fund that we have. Remember, this is a $39 million budget, and the whole budget is $145 million, so we haven't given you the detail of every budget, but we certainly can.
All right, Commissioner Thomas and then Commissioner Richardson.
Why is the child care fund on page 19 different than the child care fund on this summary?
The child care fund summary on page 19 was just to show how we ended 2009.
Well, but on page 102, it zeroes out.
Right, if you flip the page, my note on page 19 indicates that we used the entire general fund appropriation of $1 million. If we would have appropriated only 900, we would have ended the year with a deficit in the child care fund. But the $1 million appropriation, which is the activity 970 on page 102, was the amount that was budgeted initially, and that appropriation was necessary. If you recall, in 2008, we had to increase the appropriation at the end of the year to cover the deficit. The one thing I want to point out here is, starting with, even, there's appropriations to the health department. Budgeting, I hate to say it, but it's a funny thing. We use fund accounting, and we follow the state's, budget statutes. Almost every fund is different in terms of its accounting focus, its budgetary basis. To give you another example of how things are different, if you look at the circuit court and the district court funds, those are both special revenue funds. We have a separate fund for circuit court and a separate fund for district court, and that's primarily because we have interlocal agreements with the other two counties to fund those court operations. So you have both county, Grand Traverse County, Antrim and Leelanau County appropriations going into those separate special revenue funds. Those two funds, in Activity 982 and 983, are based on actual expenditures incurred. We do not appropriate additional amounts to the circuit or district court fund. They have no fund balance. We bill the counties for their proportionate share of the cost. So friend of the court is a little bit different. Its funding source, its primary funding source is the CRP, federal revenue reimbursement, but yet all three counties contribute a fixed amount based on, an agreement with the county boards to that fund. And that is the main reason why that appropriation is exactly equal to the budget that was established.
Commissioner Richardson.
Dean, I think what would be useful, at least useful for me, is if we could just have a listing of the funds that are not part of the general fund balance, just like a year-end comparison of, December 31st of '09 versus December 31st of '08. Because I understand what you're saying, that we appropriate money to an agency that is funded separately. We spend the agency spends all that money, and then there's some up and down with the fund balance on the side. So would it be possible to just get a listing of that?
Oh, absolutely. Do you want me to key on, though, the fund balance? Or would there be some merit to have a total budget amount?
I think in my mind, what I would be looking for would be the fund balance. I mean, I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but my understanding is that there's money that's carved out that legally doesn't have any status different than the general fund, but yet is in a separate little fund, and then is not included in the general fund balance at the end of the year.
The general fund money for a certain department is moved to that fund quarterly over the beginning of the year so that there's money to run it, and it's run in a separate fund. So I think what they would like, Dean, is those funds showing budget amount in 2009, expended amount in 2009, and then perhaps fund balance. Would that cover everything?
Well, most I'm looking at, we have this number that, we really focus on, which is, the fund balance at the end of the year. Obviously, that's going to enter highly into the discussion of the budget for next year, which we're going to start early this year, because we've already talked about using $1 million, or we've budgeted $1 million of that fund balance this year. But there are funds, my understanding, I think I've had this discussion with you before, Dean, there are funds that are not counted in that general fund balance.
That's
and
correct.
those are the funds that I'm interested in. Just a listing of how much money is in each fund at the end of the year, how much money was in those funds the year previously.
I understand that, Commissioner, but Commissioner Maxbauer has asked for the comparison in the individual departments of revenue and expenditure, which is very legitimate request,
Okay,
too.
well,
So I'm trying to get both.
All right, then
Yeah.
that's to request.
Commissioner Maxbauer.
I would like basically page 101 to match the listings on page 102.
Well, it can't, but
Well,
we
it's
can
not
give you the
possible.
things that are on 102 to make it look like 101.
Okay.
That's what you want. You just want to know expenditures and revenues.
Yeah.
And we can do that.
And I agree with Commissioner Richardson. Could I have 2008 on there, too, so we could see where we're going as we plan for 2011?
Would you like 2008 on all of these as well?
I had provided...
If it's not too much trouble. I think I still have it in my budget book at home, I believe.
I do have it. I provided the same analysis a year ago, and that's easy enough to do.
Yeah, I think I've still got it in my budget book. I think I saw it this week.
Be good reference, though.
Commissioner Richardson.
Okay, and then if we could go back to the revenue, the non-departmental revenue, which is, you said basically is, mostly property tax monies?
Correct.
The $686,000 negative variance, that's because of uncollected taxes, delinquent taxes, or?
There are a number of items that make up that difference. The first and largest item, fund balance, is budgeted as a non-departmental item. We have fund balance, if we budget fund balance in the general fund, it's budgeted in this non-departmental category. That was a $497,000 number. You don't actually realize that. You're using your accumulated fund balance over time, so that's $497,000 of that difference. Other differences are, at this point in time, we booked the tax receivable based on the tax levy, so the taxes we expect to realize in full. So the difference is not due to taxes, it's due to court equity funding did not come in at what we budgeted. The state continues to decrease that funding. I can provide you with the detail on that, rather than tell you something that I don't have in front of me. I'd rather give you the details, and I can leave that in
Okay.
your box.
All right, that'd be great, thank you.
Okay, I have a question, unless somebody else has one first. All right. Dennis, so
Yes.
do I understand this correctly? And that under 101, you're indicating that by using the fund balance of $430,000, we have basically matched revenues with expenditures for the '09 year. And under that assumption, we had a couple line items that I guess Commissioner Felice and I were working on, and that was the allocation for Civic Center South, and that was all predicated on where the balance was left over on the '09 budget. So the question, and then, so that was one item. I don't know if there were any other items that were contingent upon the year-end analysis of the budget. I don't recall, but I know there were some discussions on a couple items, and we were just going to wait. So how do we handle that matter?
Well, so what this means is, even with the year-end things that we did last year, we have about 60, we didn't use about $67,000 of the fund, dollars of the fund balance.
Okay.
And Dean, I know you hate to do this, but give me rough numbers at the year-end what our fund balance is.
Well, it's actually on,
Is it here?
yeah, we started 2009 a little over 9.5 million. So if you take the 9.5 million less the 430, that's where we ended
About 9 million.
2009. Now, granted, the auditors haven't been here yet. I doubt that they're going to find anything significant, but they have the luxury of time on their side.
So the answer is, we haven't spent about $67,000 of last year's fund balance. That would typically just go back. That's
Commissioner Hooper and then Commissioner Rick.
Okay, though on page 99, you mentioned that on the summary you presented that the 211 fund, the Safe Kids and Civic Center, that's all been part of the $430,000 of fund we spent?
No.
Well, it hasn't been spent
No,
yet.
it has not been. Those have not been appropriated yet. You said, wait. Now, I will say that I think you made a commitment at the end of the year to continue to fund the Safe Kids program
Oh, yeah,
this
that's
year.
another one I forgot about.
And it was going to cost another $28,686. We have not appropriated that yet, so, and they're spending it.
Well, that individual is on payroll, and yes, that is not covered at this point.
Commissioner Richardson.
And I may be jumping ahead here because there was, somewhere here, there was a discussion about, the target for fund balance being between 18 and 20% of the actual budget. So using that number, that means the optimum fund balance would be somewhere between $7.2 and $8 million.
Yes.
So we're still $1 million over the high end of that.
About $1.1 million over.
But we're going to use that for the 010 budget. We've allocated that portion for the balance out of 010.
$970,000 in 010.
Yeah, so assuming that it comes out as budgeted at the end of 010, we're going to be around $8 million.
Yeah, 8.1, something like that.
So how would we, is now the time to talk about the Civic Center South appropriation and the Safe Kids appropriation, making those expenditures, or?
I think you can, yes, but let me just add one more thing that I think is important to remember. Remember that when we balanced that budget for 2009 and didn't spend the whole fund balance, I think it's important to remember you also made up about $525,000 in lost interest revenue that we knew at the beginning of the year wasn't going to come, and during the year, we made that up as well. So I think it's important for the board to realize you absorbed that loss and still spent $430,000 of fund balance instead of spending $900,000 of fund balance.
How much again of the fund balance is allocated in 2010? 900 and...
I think it's 950,000.
Yeah, it might be a little bit more than that, Commissioner. I'm thinking 970. It's a little under $1 million.
950.
It's 950. He said it's 950. No, he wouldn't say it if he didn't know exactly what it was. It's
Isn't that the
950.
truth?
Rather sure the
I
question
believe
come
him.
up.
Are you all set, Commissioner Friend? Okay, Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess, you know, my question is, I'm not sure why we don't close the 2009 budget. And, you know, if we want to talk about these other expenditures in 2010, they really need to be money spent in 2010. 2009's budget is done and over with, and these numbers that Dean presented us, you know, I don't believe it's fair for us to talk about spending 2009 money today.
Now,
You know, I think that time is done, over with. We need to close the 2009 budget. If we want to talk about these other expenditures that are outlined on page 99, those are going to be 2010 expenditures. Somewhere in 2010, we're going to have to figure out how to fund those.
You are correct, Commissioner. Technically, the budget for 2009 is
We
closed.
can't spend 2009 money in February of 2010.
But what you asked us to do is bring it back so you could see the analysis of how 2009 ended up.
Okay, Commissioner Richardson.
And I sort of hesitate to bring this up, but the $700,000 more or less that we allocate, that we voted to spend for central records software,
Yes,
now that's coming out of capital improvements,
that's correct.
but it wasn't actually budgeted from capital improvements. I mean, in the budget.
Well,
I mean, we had $1 million, that we allocated to capital
yeah,
improvements.
that goes into the capital improvement fund. Then what you did is you said, we're going to spend $700,000, $670,000 out of that fund. And I don't know if Dean's got it in these technical amendments, but Dean will bring you an amendment to the budget to appropriate.
Okay, well, I
Oh,
guess
it was included.
what my question is that $670,000 then, in addition to the $1 million that we're already spending the fund balance?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, but in a different
In
fund.
a different
Yes,
fund.
different fund.
In a different fund?
Yes, money that's already set aside for capital.
The budget amendment that's on page 52 is the formal budget amendment in Fund 472, the CIP fund, to cover that New World Systems software. It
Right.
really didn't have, as items are approved out of the capital improvement fund, I will bring back budget adjustments to cover. This was based on board
So
action.
just to clarify, that's not part of the general fund, the capital improvement is separate from the general.
That is correct. It's a separate fund, but the funding does come from the general fund through the appropriations.
And that appropriation is how much this year?
Isn't it $1 million?
No, it's slightly under $1 million because we reduced that based on the same percentage that we reduced the other,
998,000.
something like that, yes.
970,
And we-
maybe that's that number.
We're also paying, just so everyone remembers, we just made the interest payment on our share of the 2008 MTF road bonds, which was due on March 1st. That's a small payment at this point, but our annual contribution, I think, is in the $450,000 range.
Commissioner Fleece.
I'd like to make a motion that we fund Safe Kids .6 FT in the amount of $28,686, and Civic Center South appropriation of $25,000 out of the 2010 budget.
Okay, is there support?
Support.
All right, moved by Commissioner Fleece, support by Commissioner Thomas.
Can
we move forward with the allocation of Civic Center South and Safe Kids? Discussion, Commissioner Wheelock and then Max Bauer.
I'd like to handle these separate. I don't want to pair them up. I'd
All
like
right.
to handle
Would you be
each
willing
one
to
of
do
these
two separate
individually,
motions?
if you wouldn't mind.
We'll do the Safe Kids
We want to do
first.
Safe Kids, and then we
All
got
right.
to talk about the
Commissioner
211.
Thomas, are you
Civic
fine
Center
with the
South.
Safe Kids for the first one? Okay. Discussion.
I think we've made the commitment to the
All right.
kids and the
right.
people,
Is there
staff that's
discussion on that
been
motion?
paid, so.
Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes? Pardon me?
Opposed?
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Richardson?
Yes.
Maxbauer?
Yes.
Hooper?
Yes.
Friend?
No.
Fleece?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yep.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Stepka?
Yes.
Chairman Edelman?
Yes. Now we have a motion on the Civic Center South.
If I could, please, but I'm sorry, I just want to be clear. What we will do is, the only, Dean and I have talked, the place that this would come from would be uncommitted fund balance. So our intention would be then to put a budget amendment together that will go into the fund balance and whatever amounts you approve today and appropriate from fund balance to add to, we will add that much to the fund balance of the county budget for this year. That 970,000 will go up, and then or 950,000 will go up, and then we will appropriate it to these appropriations.
So Commissioner Fleece, you have the next motion.
Yes. I would make the motion that we approve the appropriation of $25,000 for Civic Center South, coming out of the 2010 budget.
Is there a second?
Support.
Seconded by Commissioner Stepka. Is there discussion? Commissioner Wheelock?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I personally will not support this motion. I believe there are other townships that have committed a lot of money to parks and recreation programs. Right near my house, Long Lake Township has 2 waterfront parks. They have a large park next to the fire barn. They have something in the neighborhood of 600 acres of nature education reserve area that they're utilizing now, all without county's monies that they're maintaining. This is not Grand Traverse County parkland. I don't believe we should spend Grand Traverse County parks and recreation funds without at least having a request from our county parks and recreation department to do that. And this request doesn't come from them.
Okay, Commissioner Maxbauer.
Well, I supported the Safe Kids appropriation because we actually did make the commitment. And while in the past I've not always agreed with, the former board's commitments, I've always honored them. So I did, that's why I voted for that. We have not made a commitment to Civic Center South this year. And I would agree, I've heard from Acme Township where they're trying to raise money, matching funds, to buy waterfront property. Garfield Township would like funds for their parks, and when I was out at Peninsula Township hearing about their park, they were talking about seeking funds as well. And at this time, with our budget situation the way it is, I don't think that we should be spending this money.
Okay, Commissioner Fleece.
Civic Center South is not a township park, if you will. It's a multi-township involvement and village involvement. You got Village of Fife Lake, you got the Village of Kingsley, you have Fife Lake Township, you have Paradise Township, you have Mayfield Township, and Grant Township that all actively participate in this. This saves a drive for a lot of our South County citizens to be able to have a recreational facility. That facility down there, and I think most of you attended the tour last year, is well used. And what this does, this appropriation is not an operating appropriation. This is for infrastructure improvements. They continue to improve that park down there, and it's a real asset to the county and our south townships. I can understand not funding an individual township like Blair has Township Park. They put a lot of money in, and we don't fund that, nor would I ask this board to fund that. But I think it's a very important thing. Originally, when we talked, Chairman Thomas and I went down and met with them back in 2007, and they asked us for like a 5-year commitment, and Chairman Thomas indicated we couldn't make commitments for future boards, but we certainly would attempt, because I was a brand-new commissioner then, would attempt to get the appropriation every year for 5 years. This would be the third year of the fifth year, and I'm sure most of you have noticed the name of the park, Civic Center South. And that was done by previous board years ago for good reason. And it does serve good-sized population down there. It saves roughly 18-mile trip or from the Kingsley area, and a lot more from the Fife Lake area and the Grant area to Traverse City to use recreational facilities. And I would appreciate your support on this appropriation.
Commissioner Friend.
So basically, the premise is that there's not a county rec facility in that area, and so we're accommodating for that. That's the basic premise.
That's correct. And even today, I'm trying to think of a county rec on Cass Road. That would be really the closest. You know, but that's not a recreational facility, that's a nature preserve. If you actually want a park, you have to go to Civic Center South, would really be the closest one for the majority of that area.
But the thing is, if for a county to look out for the park and recreational needs of the county, that's done through the Parks and Rec Board. And really, I think we're, in doing this, acting on their behalf, and I think that should go through the Parks and Rec Board. And even if they were to take it through Parks and Rec, I would caution them, because this is basically a different approach than what they've taken. This is, you know, allocating funding for a non-county owned property, so.
Okay. Any other discussion? I have comment. I guess my memory was that back then when this whole thing was presented, a couple things came into play. One is, as Commissioner Fleece said, you know, it was really a partnership between the townships, the villages, and the county that made Civic Center South happen. And back then we felt a really strong need to have something in South County, like Commissioner Fleece has said, that they don't have to drive all the way in to have ball fields and those kinds of events. And the other issue that kind of came up, that there is kind of a feeling in South County. I've learned that pretty hard when all of a sudden when I became a representative of Fife Lake Township, that there's a perception that, you know, all the money that's allocated and the services that are allocated by the county concentrate in the major population areas and not in the rural areas of, for example, South County. So, you know, back then the board kind of weighed that in as one of the rationales behind, you know, recreation was important. We need to keep kids busy instead of, you know, being concerned about the child care fund and having them find something else to do and get in trouble. So it was a partnership. I don't remember the 5-year deal. I think I remember 3 years, but I could be corrected. Was it a 5-year deal?
Yes.
So
It was a 5-year request.
It was a 5-year request. And so this would be the third year. I guess I would have a comfort level allocating that as the third-year appropriation. And then the board can weigh out the next 2 years if they want to do that. But we did indicate to Civic Center South that we supported the process and supported the support, but it had to be on an annual appropriation basis, which they agreed to do. But
Was that the county board making those decisions, or did you base that on the recommendation from the Parks and Rec Board?
my recollection is it didn't come from Parks and Rec. It was a request direct to the
County Board Appropriation.
Yeah, that was back then.
I think there was also at the beginning of this, there was a request, and there was an appropriation, an original capital appropriation to this park.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I thought it was $100,000, but
That's correct,
I'm not
too.
sure of the amount.
What's in the Parks and Rec fund right now? Wasn't that like 200,000?
In the fund balance?
Yes.
I don't know. Do you know?
The fund balance, when we closed the year, it's probably in that range. There was a use of fund balance, but I can go upstairs and check.
That's fine.
Yeah, we
Was there
got-
a motion already on this?
Yes. Discussion is current right now. So to wind things up, I mean, that's kind of how things got things started and, kind of where we're at. I think if we're going to move in a different direction, I think we need to at least give them 12 months' notice. And I think they're expecting this allocation based on, where the balance of the fund balance was going to be at the end of '09, which Commissioner Wheelock is correct, that it basically becomes an addition to the '10 budget. So I would just soon, personally, I'll vote for this because of that indication and the commitment. If we're going to change directions, I think we need to give them a 12-month notice. Commissioner Friend.
Larry, did you make the motion?
Yes, I did.
It was Commissioner Fleece and supported by
Me.
Stepka. Okay.
Oh, okay. Would you consider amending the motion that this gets sent back to the Parks and Rec Board for consideration of funding through their fund balance? Through the Parks and Rec
No,
fund
because it's, as you stated earlier, it's not a county-owned property. And the Parks and Recs Board doesn't, they have their own board down there, and the Parks and Recs Board really has no involvement in that park at all. In fact, I don't know how many members of the Parks and Rec Board have ever even been down there, including Jason. I don't know if Jason's ever been down to it. So I think it's better if it sits at this level here and the decision remains ours.
We're going to go with Commissioner Maxbauer and then Commissioner Wheelock.
Well, I would request that if this motion passes, that the money does not come out of the Parks and Rec Fund without input from the Parks and Rec Board.
I would agree with that. Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess, we have a subcommittee that's appointed that's dealing with the relationship between the county board and the Parks and Recreation Board about policies and such things. This is exactly where we get into this discussion, because we're talking about recreational monies. No matter how you cut it, it's still recreational monies, and you're asking the county board to make an allocation instead of bringing it through the Parks and Recreation Department. You want to know why the Parks and Recreation Board is upset when, we set fees, we do different things without their input, and here we are again. We're talking about spending $25,000 for recreational money without having their input. If we're talking about recreational money, it needs to come through the Parks and Recreation Department.
Dennison and I have a comment.
I would just like to take this opportunity in the discussion to resurrect the idea of a countywide park authority. We have talked about this from time to time in the past, but I think that to serve the public best, we should be discussing with the city, with the townships, with the others. And in fact, this county board had already given an indication years ago that they would be willing to put their assets into such an authority, to look at a countywide park and recreation authority that would service all the citizens. And I think that in the long run, that would be a much more efficient and probably provide better service mechanism to the citizens of the county, and I hope the board would kind of keep that in their thinking, because I think there's some real potential there.
Right.
I'd like to comment on that very, very quickly. That plays right into some of the Parks and Rec articles that I've read that talk about, as an economic driver to this area, what so many people are looking for, and that's the Park and Rec opportunities. And to strengthen that in any way would be something we should look at.
Okay. I have a comment, kind of following Commissioner Maxbauer's remarks. Acme Township is preparing, or has prepared, a request to have help do some match funding for their shoreline project. I know Fife Lake Village has a park that they are trying to continue to develop, and they plan on asking the county for an appropriation. They're going to send a letter. So I think, once we get beyond this vote, I think at some point in time in the near future, we need to sit down either with our board or the Parks and Rec Board and talk about what is going to be our policy regarding funding recreational and park situations that are owned and operated not by the county. So I expect those requests to come in this year, and we're going to have to debate those issues and make some hard decisions.
And this is not the only time that the board has appropriated money. The board also paid for, I think, fixing the tennis courts at Fife Lake Township in the time that I've been here. So the board has made other appropriations to other groups for recreation services, and I think you're right, a policy on how you're going to address those things, hopefully through the Parks Board, is a good idea.
Yeah, and I've indicated to both Wayne Clatter and Noreen out in Fife Lake Village that we have a pretty challenging year coming up decisions for '11, and the budget's set for '10, and, it's going to have some hard discussions, so. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Is there further discussion? Motion is to approve the allocation request for Civic Center South in the amount of $25,000. All right. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Max Bauer,
No.
Hooper,
Yes.
Friend,
No.
Fleece,
Yes.
Thomas,
Yes.
Wheelock,
No.
Stepka,
Yes.
Richardson,
No.
Chairman Inman. Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Passes 5-4. Okay. Can we now move back to facilities?
Excuse me.
No, one more.
You got the 211 funding, did you want to
Oh, I'm
talk about
sorry.
that?
I thought 211 was on hold, that we had basically agreed that we were going to fund it, but they weren't asking for an allocation in 010 or
Do
11.
we still have the 2009 allocation, Dean?
Oh, I thought
There
they
was
did.
no allocation made in
I think they told us to hold, they had some grant funding that they would need it right now.
We have not made any
Okay,
allocation.
we put several conditions on that, the original
We're gonna come up with
request.
a business plan.
And they, to this day, have still, they came and updated us once, but they've still not made a formal request.
Yeah, my recollection is that, they were going to come in with a business plan. The other part was they had received some outside funding and
Right.
didn't need our funding at this point in time.
I thought it was 20,000 we did grant them, and then they didn't need funding beyond that.
At this time, that's right. I think
you
there
look
was,
into
but I think it's a 2008 appropriation.
Yeah, we made an appropriation in 2008 to them, and at that point, there was a commitment that that was going to be all the money they were going to need from us.
Right.
They were going to find the operational funding for that.
Right.
So, I'm not in any position to support any additional funding.
I think we need to address that when they come forward.
Yeah, and
Is that correct?
Sonny's correct, exactly correct.
All right.
One time out.
Doesn't happen often, but once in a while.
All right. With that, you want to move back to facilities? Danny?
Sure we've done anything.
Good morning. Danny Brown, Facilities Director. I'm here today to discuss the gas contract, natural gas contract. It's due at the end of March. Excuse me. Since getting into this, again, this is a very volatile environment. When you talk to these folks, these prices are all over the board. And it's sort of difficult to kind of get a handle on it, but one thing I have learned that we don't need to jump the gun. I like to get things done. Well, in this case, what happens here is that the Public Service Commission sets a rate for DTE, and that rate hasn't been established yet. So all the other suppliers, they key off of that rate. Well, that's not going to happen until about mid-March. So the timing's a little tight in there, but I think that we should probably wait and see what happens. Typically, what happened last year is that the rate was about 0.659, and then 2 weeks later, it came down to 0.599. So by waiting 2 weeks, that 5 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, for as much gas as we burn, it's quite a big number. So I was going to make a recommendation to lock down this contract with IGS, that's our current supplier. Now, they are higher by almost, they're offering right now to date 0.679, and hopefully that this will come down. So I think we should wait. I'll come back to the new committee that I'm in. I don't know what was it called?
Resource man.
And I'm sorry I was late. I thought the Ways and Means was tonight, so I got to learn these
Gotta
things.
keep up around here, huh?
Yeah, I guess. Got to keep up.
Are you all set? We got our Commissioner Wheelock and then Commissioner Fleece.
I guess I can kind of give some history to this a little bit, because I kind of tangled Danny into this thing a year ago.
Right.
I started, my natural gas usage is about 2.5 million cubic feet a year. I don't know exactly what the county's is, but it's probably more than that. I started in 2007 locking down contracts on gas. At that point, I was paying 0.7442, which is less than they're offering today. And in 2008, when I looked at the end of 2007, if I'd have rode the roller coaster up and down for DTE, we'd have been almost exactly the same money, maybe down a couple tenths or maybe a couple hundredths of a point on the gas price for 2008. But in 2007. 2008, I rode the roller coaster. The average was 83 cents. So it was considerably higher. In 2009, I locked down .599. But it's interesting, on February 19th of 2009, the offer to me from Interstate Gas, which is the same people that Danny has under contract, was .649. On 225, it was .599. You know, and 2.5 million cubic feet, that's a lot of money, you know. Yesterday, I'm not smart enough to do it, but I have an associate that buys his natural gas right off the New York Stock Exchange's gas futures. Yesterday, the market rate was .551. If you purchased at a 12-month contract, the rate was .591. The current supply yesterday was approximately 9% over the national average. Now, they base these numbers on what the surplus is, because if there's gas in tanks that they're not selling, they want to sell it, and they'll drop the price to do that. Now, there's a lot of discussion. Well, when I talked to Jacob at IGC the other day, he tells me, well, you know, it's been an awfully cold winter, gas usage is up. Yeah, residential gas usage is up, but industrial gas usage in this country is down significantly. So we are still over 9% over the 5-year average of how much gas we have in surplus. I believe this number is going to come down. I like Danny, absolutely sure this is going to come down. I have my 2010 contract sitting on my desk, but I'm not signing it because I know that this number will come down, but it's probably going to be the last week in February, the first week in March. That number will come down. Danny and I both have the same contract. It expires March 31st. So, you know, we can set on this thing for a couple weeks. You know, what I would suggest to this board is that we allow Danny to keep an eye on this, because, you know, I'm sure he and I can talk about it because we'll both be watching. But the fact is that we don't want to lock this contract higher than we have to, you know, because it saves a huge amount of money in the course of a year. But we don't want to ride the roller coaster either.
Commissioner Fleece, did you have something? And then we'll go down.
Presently, the contract's .599.
That's correct.
And they're not willing to lock it in at that rate for another year?
No. They want to lock it into .679. Like,
No, I would agree with you and Sonny then. I think we should wait. And
yeah, I think that'd be
I'm
prudent.
trying to think, we probably ought to authorize Danny to lock it in when it's a favorable position for the county, because he knows the volumes that we use.
Commissioner Dennis.
Well, that's what, I don't know the right mechanism to use, but, you know, it would be nice. You know, I don't want to get to the second week in March and have a .55 rate and then wait till the board meeting at the end of the month and go up to 5.9.
You're going to have to sign that thing at the day that it comes to you.
Right.
You're going to have to make a decision.
So if you, I don't know what you'd be comfortable with, but if you could give us a level, you know, if it falls below this, Danny, and you want to sign it, he could talk with me and sign it. That would be one way to handle it, but I guess some flexibility would be useful if you don't mind, or...
I'd feel comfortable leaving it at your discretion, and your and Danny's.
And I think if you have the opportunity, you ought to negotiate with them. You could say, you know, I can lock it in for,
Well, currently, I've got about 7 suppliers that are calling me every other hour, it seems like.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a lot of negotiating.
Commissioner Richardson.
What's the best rate you've been offered so far?
The best rate is the 679.
I mean,
To date.
If we authorized you to sign anything under a certain level, say .6 or .61, does that give you enough flexibility?
Yeah, that would be great.
That would be great.
Okay, I'll make the motion then to authorize the facilities manager to sign a contract for any price that he deems reasonable under .60.
Okay, moved by Richardson, support by Stepka. Is there discussion?
I don't think you're going to get below 6.0. You know, we were at 5.99 last year.
Wow.
I don't think you're going to get below .60.
Okay, you want to make it 6.1? Do you think that would be more reasonable?
Would that be 619?
How about 625, 6 1/4?
Okay.
yeah.
Let's clarify the motion, we'll go to Commissioner Maxwell. Clarify the motion, you're going to do
Okay, let's make the limit, below .625.
625? Support. And it's also supported by Commissioner Stepka. Now we have Commissioner Maxwell.
Sounds like a gas auction to me.
My preference is to let Danny do it, period, and not give him a number. And I say that having made my living at this for 5 years. When I worked for Shell, at one point in my career, every cubic foot of gas that moved in the state of Michigan moved through my desk on paper. So my preference is, you know, Danny knows what he's doing, and my preference is just to let him do it.
Any other discussion?
I would agree, because sometimes unusual things happen, and I think we have to trust his judgment. And he, like I said, he knows the volumes.
You wish to change your motion? Or you want to hold?
I guess I have a question first for Danny. The contract expires on March 31st. I mean, you have the flexibility to go pretty much right up until then?
It actually expires on the last billing statement, which could be the 26th or 7th, or whenever the statement comes out. Then it expires, and then you roll it. So there's no firm date.
You are convinced that locking it in at a fixed rate is preferable to?
I think so. I have a lot of suppliers that are trying to talk me into the fact that, well, if you float it month to month, here's what happens. Well, none of them has showed me that they got under, for 2009, that they got under that rate. None of them did. They're all 63, 64, right in there. So they're not convinced. They haven't convinced me. So I think, yes.
If they got within a nickel of what we locked in at.
So I think locking it down is the right thing to do.
I'm willing to amend my motion to leave it up to Danny's discretion.
Okay, is that?
Support, yeah.
All right, supported by the second, Commissioner Stepka. Is there discussion on the amendment, or on the change of the motion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. All right, moving on to administration. Item number 1, proposed delinquent tax revolving fund earnings distribution policy.
Okay.
Is that Dennis, is that your item, or?
Yes.
Page 103?
Trying to get there.
Wait a minute. Don't we have the hybrid plan first?
No, that's on
Number 7.
That's number 7 on that section. We moved it.
We added it.
Added at number 7 on administration.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it
Oh,
was
number
finance.
7 administration, I thought
Yep.
it was, okay,
Yep.
I understand. That's fine.
Okay.
They're in the consent. Okay. All right, so this is, the board asked us to put together a tax delinquent fund earnings distribution policy. It was discussed at our previous meeting that our old policy, which is included in here under a resolution of the board, from time to time did not meet the needs of the county. In fact, in this case, probably would mean it couldn't be appropriated. But there have been other resolutions adopted by the board to amend the resolution over time. So Dean and Bill and I spent a good bit of time going over this, and I guess in summary, what I would say is that what we're suggesting to you is that the board maintain the ability to decide how much of the tax delinquent fund would be used on an annual basis. And the process we would use would be for the treasurer to look at the fund balance during budget time, to make a determination on what he thought was appropriate to protect the integrity of the fund, because we believe very strongly that the integrity of the fund helps our financial condition significantly. Then he would recommend that to Dean and I, and we would include it in the budget resolution as part of our recommended revenue, but we would leave it annually to the discretion of the board in the budget process on how much you actually wanted to put in. So that's our recommendation.
It's a pleasure of the board. Commissioner
Mr.
Wheelock.
Chairman, I would move to pass the resolution as outlined on 104. I like the cooperative work with the treasurer, the finance department, and the county administrator and county board to establish what's best for this community as a whole.
Moved by Wheelock, support by Hooper. Discussion, Commissioner Hooper.
Now, this is just the first year where we've actually had to borrow for this fund?
This
First year in how long?
This is the first year since 1991.
91, and
Bill,
then,
would you mind coming up just in case there's any further questions? Go ahead.
so how, I know I've seen it before, but how big has the surplus been?
Well, it's not really a surplus,
Well, I guess-
Commissioner. We've been over $10 million in the
Okay,
fund.
11.
11. over $11 million in the fund. And, Bill, why don't you just explain briefly how the fund works?
Yeah, I'll give you just a little history. When I came here, the first year I came here, there was no fund balance in this delinquent tax revolving fund. Every year, the county board basically took everything that was in that fund to the general fund, so every year we borrowed the full amount of the delinquent taxes. When I came, I suggested that we try to make this fund what it's supposed to be, which was a delinquent tax revolving fund where we just relieve the money in the fund. So what I recommended at that time was that if we didn't have the fund, the general fund receives their administrative fee and the interest on their share of the taxes to fund the general fund operations. So we took that amount out every year, but that was the only amount that we took out of the revolving fund until it became fully funded in '91. And then after that time, once it became fully funded, then we started making recommendations to take out additional amount. We always, every year since I've been here, we've taken out what the general fund was supposed to get if we didn't have the revolving fund. And so over the years, this fund has, it has a fund balance of around 10 million, and we've maintained that pretty much since '91. There hasn't been a whole lot of fluctuation in that fund balance since we became fully funded. This is the first year since then that our delinquent taxes may be at a point where that isn't sufficient, but it's still, a healthy number.
Bill, for many years, the tax delinquent system in Michigan was, you could be 3 years in delinquency, is that correct?
Right, and then it changed in 1999 to 2 years. So we had, there's been changes over the years, and every time there's been a change, we've done something different. I believe since I've been treasurer, we've taken about 20 million out of that fund to the general fund over the years. So the fund is a moneymaker, and we haven't really, the goal hasn't been just to keep everything in that fund, it's been to keep enough in the fund to keep it funded. And then the balances are made available to the county board. We had a normal policy, but now we're suggesting that we just look at that annually.
And a lot of that is because just the volatility of the economy and everything else that we're faced with, the fact that we have to borrow again this year. I think it's also important to explain to the board that the amount of money in that fund is actually going up.
Well, the earnings in the fund is actually, this last year was the most we've ever earned in that fund since I've been here.
But of course, the number of delinquencies are going up as well.
What's happening is the delinquent taxes are higher, so all the assets in the fund are in the form of delinquent taxes now instead of cash that we normally have at this point in time.
Someone that has a delinquency, what is the interest and penalty they pay so the board understands?
In March 1st of this year, your 2009 taxes will become delinquent if they're not paid. We charge, it's not that we charge, but the state statute requires us to charge 1% per month for the first year. And then after the first year of delinquent, so March 1st of 2011, those taxes would then start the foreclosure process. The interest rate reverts back to 1.5% per month, back to the first date of delinquent. So there's 18% interest added if you go over 1 year delinquent. So even if we had to borrow, we'd be borrowing probably 2 or 3%. The amount that's paid by the delinquent taxpayers is much more significant than that.
So you could see that.
But that's a statutory rate, and that has changed over the years. It was 0.75% per month when I started, and the legislators could reduce that down, but that's a decision for the state legislators.
Okay, we're going to go with Commissioner Wheelock, Richardson, and then Hooper.
Bill, I think for, the people that haven't had the discussion with you about this, maybe if you could just tell briefly why all of a sudden, if we haven't had to borrow money since 2000 or 1991, why all of a sudden do we have to borrow money? because we've got a couple key pieces of property that have...
Well, yeah, we have one key piece of property.
But, you know, if you could explain that, you know, not only for the board, but for the audience and maybe watching, you know.
Yeah, and I've had some discussions with this particular group, and I'm not sure if they're going to pay or not. But we have one taxpayer development in Acme Township that has, between the 3 years that are delinquent, the 2007, 2008, and the current year, 2009, have roughly probably $2.5 million of delinquent taxes in that one development.
Whoa.
Just for the 2007 tax, it's about $1 million. So if they somehow come up with the financing between now and March 31st for all those delinquent taxes, you know, that's going to be a $2.5 million that we would have in that fund. And
Bill,
that,
they may only pay the 2,000.
but they may only pay the 2007. That's the only thing that they're required to keep it out of foreclosure, which would be about $1 million. But even that would definitely, I mean, it's a big number compared, we've usually borrowed between 7 and 10 million, so it's 10% of our delinquent rate right there.
Commissioner Richardson.
It says here, you know, the county treasurer will evaluate the fund's financial status and recommend, you know, an amount to be included for distribution. When during the year is that decision made? Or would it be made?
Well, it's usually made, it's what we've done in the past, we've basically done it like a year behind, so the earnings for this year are made available for next year's budget. So, I mean, there's always a lag time there between when we've made it. But
I understand that, but is that done during the summer then?
It'll be made during the budget process,
Right.
whatever the budget process is.
When we sit down with Bill in June, July, and look at the revenues for interest and those kinds of things, we'll also look at the revenue for this.
And how much money, like over the last couple of years, has been put into the general fund?
Between the general fund and the capital, it's been
Maybe
close to $1 million a year.
Commissioner Hooper.
I've been satisfied, thank you.
You're all set? Any other questions
I
on the
think
motion?
we got those
Commissioner Friend.
numbers last time this was before the board, right?
Yeah,
Back in the packet.
and I can prepare something if you want, but I think it was in last month's packet.
Any other comments, questions on the motion? Okay, we have a motion to approve the tax revolving fund earnings distribution policy as presented. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Thank you, Bill. Moving on to the unrestricted fund balance policy. We've already taken care of
I'm going to
item
pass,
two.
the commission asked that we do this as well. I'm going to pass out a revised one. This revised one just has some grammatical changes that were recommended by some commissioners who contacted us during the course of the week, and so I just passed that out. These are truly grammatical things, like where we talk about 18 to 20% in the first paragraph, and then we keep repeating it. Instead of that, this says we target it. We misspelled the word counties as plural, so we fixed up some of those things. So I want to point those out, that we made some technical changes, grammatical changes primarily. And then we added some wording, like in the bottom of the first paragraph, that says, and a mechanism for replenishing the fund balance below the target range. Let me just summarize this policy by saying, well, this was a request by the board in the budget process. We looked at several sample policies, some provided by commissioners and others. Let me say that we're recommending a range that is higher than any of the policies I think I saw in the 18 to 20% range. This is very conservative but appropriate, we think. GFOA, I believe, recommends that if you look at revenues as the basis, you go between 5 and 15% of a fund balance. And if you look at expenditures, you go between 5 and 17%.
7 and 18.
7 and 18, excuse me. Oh, there it is. Nope, 8 and 17. So if you were going to use revenues as the basis, 5 and 15. If you were going to use expenditures, 8 and 17 is the range. We're recommending 18 to 20% as a conservative range to protect the integrity of the fund. We're basing this looking at revenues. You can look at either revenues or expenses. we suggest looking at revenues because based on what we've been hearing from the board, we're making an assumption here that the board is going to be moving towards the idea of being able to live within your revenue means. And so based on that, we believe that revenue now becomes the driver for the budget, not expenditures as the driver for the budget. So we looked at revenue as the basic means to determine the appropriate use of fund balance. We're also making this policy, of course, we're using this as a mechanism to provide for the county board a number in the budget that we project, but of course, we're leaving it to the discretion of the county board in the budget hearing as to what the board is comfortable with, if anything. So we all three of us met on this several times, Bill, Dean, and I. We're very comfortable with this policy, but we realize the board may have some other changes they would like to make.
Okay. It's a pleasure of the board. Commissioner Friend.
I think you did a nice job on the policy. I would, one thing I just wanted to mention, just to clarify, consistent with our board rules, you have 2/3 approval with the County Board of Commissioners, and I think Bob Cooney always put commissioners elected and serving. I think it was that higher, just to clarify.
I'm sorry, would you repeat that, please?
Just real simple, in number 3, 2/3 approval of the County Board of Commissioners, and Cooney consistently would say 2/3 of the commissioners elected and serving, I think. That would clarify that.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
If you've got somebody that's appointed and serving,
I don't remember what the terminology
We got a
he
distinction
had.
without a difference almost, too.
because we do have that
It's
once in a
the-
while.
It's in the board rules. What did it just sets that, rather than 2/3 of who's ever here,
We just said 2/3 approval of County Board of Commissioners serving.
serving. Fine.
That would...
Serving is fine.
That would generate
Well-
your supermajority.
Serving is the wrong word. Present, I'll agree with.
Well, no, president,
No.
because...
You can have
That's what you're
6
trying to
members
get away
out of
from.
9 here.
Yeah.
They're all three.
What-
We
what's-
just have
what's-
5 people here.
I think the intent is to get 6 votes to dip that deeply into the fund balance.
It's
Let
not
me-
a big deal. It's
Let me
in the-
suggest that I'll get the appropriate wording. If the intent is 2/3 of the whole board, I will ask Cooney to change the policy for next week.
Yep, so I would make a motion that we approve the unreserved fund balance policy as a,
Okay.
Support.
Moved by Commissioner Friend,
presented.
support by Commissioner Thomas to approve the unreserved fund balance policy as presented with clarification of all members serving. Is there discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed, passes.
The next item was a request from commissioners for some additional information about the payment in lieu of insurance usage. That is on page 125. I think all we can tell you is that the majority of these contracts were approved after the time of the annual renewal, and actually we have a reduction down particularly because of MSU extension laying people off. So we still have 5 groups, and we will have 7 groups that will have opportunity to utilize this in this next sign-up period. So we really can't tell you what the impact of it is.
Okay, Commissioner Richardson.
Yeah, because I'm the one who asked for this information. When is the open enrollment period?
November.
Okay, so the decisions we made then in December really didn't take effect
For a
until
year.
For a whole year,
That's correct.
except for any new hires.
That's correct. And what we will do, Commissioner, is we will, I've already talked with the HR department, we will have a kind of a campaign, an informational campaign that we will put together prior to that renewal, making sure everyone's aware of the opportunity to take advantage of this, and then, try to make sure that everyone has that awareness, and hopefully that will increase the numbers.
Yeah, because, the whole point of doing it was to save money by getting more people to take the buyout. But instead, we have actually cost ourselves the extra $1,000 times 36 for the whole year before we find out if it's going to save us any money.
Yeah, it would cost us about $3,000, I would assume, if everybody was on the family plan, because they were already getting $1,000 under the family plan, and now they would get two. So potentially, this cost us $3,000 in initiating it at this time.
3,000 or 30,000? Because there's 30 people.
It's 36. You say 36 people are participating this year.
Well, they were already participating. Oh, yes. You're right.
I mean, we doubled the buyout they were getting.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, so this is information only? All right.
Yeah, no, I had my question answered.
All right. Anybody else have any questions on this item? All right, we'll bring that back at a later date. Item 5, Child and Family Services, page 126.
This is a request from Child and Family Services to submit a grant application for Safe Haven Supervised Visitation and Safe Exchange Program. It has to be done through a unit of local government, being Grand Traverse County. They indicate their tie-in with not only the Friend of the Court, but our local courts. Carol Stocking and I are working with them, or will work with them, to submit this grant application. There is no match requirement on the part of the county. They had made this request last year as well, and they are currently funding the program. They did not receive the grant last year, so they're using their own funds to continue the program, but would like you to authorize their submission of this grant. There is a March deadline. We want to have the application submitted by March 10th to meet the deadline, and I would be asking for your approval, should you allow us to do this, to actually apply for the grant by the March 10th deadline.
Okay, Commissioner Hooper.
Yeah, I would move that we authorize Child and Family Services to apply for the Safe Haven Supervised and Visitation Safe Exchange Program grant.
Support.
All right, moved by Commissioner Hooper, supported by Commissioner Friend. Discussion. Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Passes. All right. That leads us to the administrator's update.
Did you want to do the merge?
I can do the hybrid and then go to the administrator's update? Okay.
That sounds...
Let's go to item 7, the hybrid issue, which was originally on the receive and file. We moved it. That is on page 12. And then Dennis, you're going to lead that discussion?
Yep. The actual amount of the actuarial study will be $11,200. And we are recommending that the board authorize us to do the actuarial on this hybrid plan study. In addition to that, at the same time, I'm following through with John Axe, and we are looking at the bonding option, bonding to pay whatever we owe, and then paying it over a 25-year period. John indicates that at this point in time, we legally can't do that. The reason that Oakland County was able to do it is because they are not in the MERS program. They are a self-funded program. But there is legislation currently pending that he anticipates will be adopted in March or April that will allow counties to do this very thing. So we are providing John with the analysis, the financials on it, and John is going to crunch the numbers to tell us whether it's financially feasible, and then we can compare that to the benefits of the hybrid plan and then bring that back to you for some consideration in the future as possible options. So we think that it's in the county's best interest to do the actuarial on the hybrid plan, so you have all the numbers on that, and then at the same time, we'll bring you back with the option of bonding to pay our shortage in that fund, and then the county board can, make some determinations on if they'd like to do one or the other.
Commissioner Fleece.
I would move that we authorize the actuarial evaluation of the MERS hybrid program in the amount of $11,200 with funds, I believe Mr. Bott stated some months earlier, being available in the retirement program.
The funds are available in the Employee Fringe Benefits Fund, the retirement program. Yes, that's correct.
Is there support on the motion? Support. Moved by Commissioner Fleece, support by Commissioner Wheelock to move forward with a hybrid evaluation, the amount of $11,200. Is there discussion? Commissioner Richardson.
Yeah, this was on the agenda for, was it the Board of Commissioners last January? Last month.
Summer. I think we had a discussion of the previous Ways and Means where we invited the MERS representative in.
No, it was actually on the agenda.
Yeah, we
and then it was
pulled. You're right. You're exactly right.
It was pulled at the last minute.
You're exactly
the reason I mention this is because I had a lengthy discussion with Dean the day before about the whole program, And he was actually raising concerns because the terms of the hybrid plan that was presented to us last August had changed to what was being presented in January. And I thought the reason we were given that it was pulled off of January was that there were questions that had to be answered by MERS, and that the MERS board would not be meeting again until March, and so therefore these questions could not be answered until March. And now yet, here it is again. I'm very concerned that we're just basically going back into a hybrid plan. I mean, not a hybrid plan, we're just basically going back into a defined benefit plan to get out from under, the crushing burden that MERS themselves are putting on us. And the question I asked Dean when we had this long conversation in January was, why is MERS, so enthralled with the hybrid plan? He said he didn't really know the answer to that question. And I just think we need more information before we go down the road. And which brings another point is, if MERS likes this plan that well, why don't they pay for the actuarial study? So I will be voting against this because I don't think we have enough information.
All right, is there further discussion?
Well, I'd like to respond.
Okay, go ahead.
First of all, I guess you could say that same thing about any insurance company. I'm sure they all like their plans a lot, but they don't pay for their own actuarials. The client pays for the actuarials. Yes, we did have questions about where MERS was at on this, and we were quite frustrated with them in January because we were getting conflicting reports from them about what the plan would include, and we've made it very clear to them that we were unhappy with that. We think we understand what the plan would include, but I think it's important, and Commissioner, I certainly respect your position, and we'll do whatever the county board says. It's important to remember we're not making a decision on the hybrid plan. We're only getting the information we need to make a decision on an annual appropriation of $4.5 million. And until we have the information, it's very difficult to make judgments one way or another. And we just think it's important that in this case you have all the information so that you can make that decision. The reservations you have about the hybrid plan are reservations I share about the hybrid plan, which is why I suggested we look at the bonding as another alternative, because it may be a much more agreeable alternative. We're being told by MERS that this is something that's very desirable by employees. Now, I have some, kind of tangential experience with that. I know that the current situation we have, based on the way the plan came in, is not very desirable by a lot of employees. They're very upset about the fact that they don't have any kind of a defined benefit component to their plan. So I tend to believe that MERS is correct in that this will be desirable by the employee groups, but we have no indication of that whatsoever. This is the very preliminary step. This is not much different than any other recommendation we would make to you. We would tell you that we can't make the analysis. We don't have the ability to do this actuarial analysis. And I think we need to get this information because it's a $4.5 million annual expenditure, and we need to make sure you have complete information on this before we make any recommendation and you make any decision. So we think it's worth doing.
Okay, further discussion. Commissioner Max Bauer and then Friend.
I run from the words defined benefit as fast as I can. Defined benefit costs more than defined contribution, and I will not be supporting the motion.
Commissioner Friend.
Oh, I was just going to make the distinction that supporting the motion is different than supporting the implementation of a hybrid plan.
Supporting any
This
plan.
is just a component of getting the information to make that decision.
Commissioner Richardson, then I have a remark if everyone's finished.
And I agree with you, Commissioner Friend, but part of the problem I see here is that MERS themselves, I don't think, is providing, full information, or maybe they themselves do not know exactly how it's going to work, because I spent a lot of time last month trying to figure this thing out, and getting through the discussion with Dean, I discovered that maybe he himself was not sure exactly how it was going to work. And the whole issue, the whole problem we're in is, this narrowing field that MERS has put us in to cover the defined benefit. Yes, it hurts, but that's the cost that we have to do to get through this defined benefit thing. Out the other side, we're in much better shape. And I just hate to take any step that reverses that, that's all.
And we may still come to the decision that that's the appropriate way to go.
Yeah, well, to me, it's a slippery slope that, and until I have better information going in, I can't support it.
All right, Commissioner Fleece and then Commissioner Hooper.
Well, staff earlier, or last year, made a request, Mr. Bott made a request for this actuarial to be conducted, and the board, I believe, on a 5-4 turned it down, which I disagreed with
4-4.
wholeheartedly.
It was actually a 4-4.
4-4, I was gone.
Okay, 4-4 then. I think when you have staff, and you have the caliber of staff we have, and they make a recommendation for something they're unable to do themselves, so they will be able to make a well-informed piece of advice for us, for the board, in the future. What we're doing is authorizing the actuarial. We're not authorizing the plan. They may very well take a look at the actuarial and come back and say, we don't want to do this, or we do want to do it. And so I think it's important that we do the actuarial.
Okay, Commissioner
Now,
Hooper.
I was just going to ask Dennis, when was the last time we had an actuarial done, an evaluation such as that?
I'm going to ask Dean to answer.
Well, the defined benefit component, there's actuarial valuation done annually.
Okay.
It's a requirement of MERS's organization structure, and that is what determines our annual contributions for the defined benefit. The hybrid component, is an entirely, would be, a different plan. And that's why they require, a different or a separate valuation to determine what that might look like and what the funding cost would be. And ultimately, you don't know if it's offered what employees might opt to convert. So there are a number of unknowns that can somewhat be quantified with that more detailed and specific actuarial valuation. And actuarial science is nothing that I know anything about, so.
Okay. I have a remark, if everyone's done. I probably was the toughest critic on this thing when it first came out, reflecting on Commissioner Max Bauer's comments regarding the whole purpose of getting out behind the defined benefit program. But I guess, thinking about where we're moving forward with not only the 11 budget for, that we've got to discuss here soon, and moving forward for the next several years, I'm really concerned that the amortization schedule that MERS has scheduled for us is going to continue to put major strains on our budget. I mean, they've got us, I think, at a 15-year AM now, and they can go down as far as, I think, a 10-year AM on that program, which is going to just continue to put a real strain on our budget situation here at the county. So I had a conversation with our administrator, Dennis Aloya, and I guess my opinion, learning that, as we moved into the first of the year, that we were going to have, by virtue of the budget process, because we went to the budget process after we had the discussion about the MERS, that, I didn't expect that we would have $1.2 million hole, and we were going to transfer fund money to cover the budget for 2010 to that magnitude. That really led me back to the thinking that we should really leave no stone unturned, at least at this point, that, the two elephants we got in the budget right now, I think, are the cost of our health insurance and the cost of the MERS program. And I told Dennis, I said, if we can somehow, in 2010, determine if we can find a way to have all of our employees co-pay health care by 10%, that'd add another $500,000 to our budget. And if we can figure out how to take the amortization schedule back to 28 years or 20 years for MERS, I mean, that would basically solve our budget problem for next 2011 and the next several years. So, I know that in my mind, this particular issue is, and reflects on two things for me. One is the funding issue, And I felt a little bit easier, not totally sold, when the MERS representative came in and basically indicated that their program would not allow somebody on a defined contribution to take money from their current plan and dump it into a new defined benefit program, which would, create an instant major liability. That they would, the product that they have available now was you start day one with the defined benefit at a lower percentage cost of a 1.5 versus the 2.5 we have now. And then moving forward, you're expensing a lower cost for the cost for defined benefit under the hybrid, but you're lowering the cost in terms of the match for the defined contribution. So the combination between the two products, it was their recommendation and the intent was that you would not be spending any more than what you're spending now for your defined contribution program. So that made me feel just a tad better about that particular product, even though, I do have some long-term issues with defined benefit. But I think that for $11,000, I think we need the information because we got some major decisions to make in our budget, and rather than potentially nickel and diming every department and laying people off, we can figure out a way, in my opinion, to solve this 11 budget and moving forward in 012 without laying anybody off and nickel and diming every department. If we can figure out how to fix the health costs and our MERS costs, I think we've got this thing licked. So, just my personal opinion, so I will be voting for this motion to get that information. Any other discussion? Hearing none, the motion is to move forward with the evaluation process for the 11,200. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Hooper?
Yes.
Friend?
Yes.
Fleece?
Yes.
Thomas?
Yes.
Wheelock?
Yes, ma'am.
Stepka?
Yes.
Richardson?
No.
Maxbauer?
No.
Chairman Inman?
Yes. Motion passes 7-2. Okay, now we're going to go into the administrator's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. About 2 weeks ago, I received an opinion from Bob Cooney regarding the Secretary of the Board duties for county board meetings, since we've changed to these committee of the whole meetings. That opinion was requested by Linda Coburn, the county clerk, and basically it indicated that he felt it's the responsibility of the county clerk to be the secretary to all the meetings, since they are now committee of the whole meetings. So the clerk, and Linda can feel free to add to this, the clerk is now required to be here, or her deputy to be here to record all of the meetings. We're still working through the details of this because obviously our system of recording minutes are tied into the computer system, which is tied into our program that, has all the minutes on the internet in our website and those kinds of things. And so we've offered to train Linda's staff on how to use that on the computer so that everything is computerized, the minutes are computerized, and those kinds of things. Linda's been very helpful in keeping the timing on this so that because the clerk has to keep the timing of each item so that when someone goes to our website and goes on the screen and looks down the agenda and calls up an item, so they can see it on the video, that they can actually move to that item.
It
So
doesn't always work.
I know it doesn't, because it requires, we don't always get the timing down exact. So that's something we continue to work on. So I wanted you to be aware, that's the reason that the clerk is here. Chris Kramer will not be at the meetings any longer. And what I do not want to do is have a situation where the clerk is taking minutes and then we have to take those minutes, or we have to go back and watch the video all over again and then put the minutes on the computer printout. That's not an efficient way to do it. So we're working through those details, but that's the reason that Linda will be here at all the meetings, or her deputy. And I just wanted the board to be aware of that. Linda, did you want to add anything?
We're meeting at, immediately following this meeting today to be trained on the system. And the reason that I brought that question to Mr. Cooney is I was receiving multiple emails from county clerks around the state, and actually Washtenaw County was sued for violating the Freedom of Information and Open Meetings Act because the clerk wasn't clerking the board meetings when there was a quorum present. So I just sent those emails on to Bob Cooney, asked him, I said, I really don't want more work, but I really don't want any laws either. So, and he says, well, here's the bad answer to your question, because, and here I am. So
The bad news is spending the morning with us?
yeah, the bad news is you guys are stuck with me for, well, next week I'll be in Florida, so you'll get Bonnie. So-
Either for Dennis or you. Dennis's staff was doing the resolutions. They were reading the minutes and then preparing the resolutions. Now, does that mean that your staff does that, or does she do that, the resolutions for the board meeting?
We're going to talk about that, but I'm assuming that we will still do that part of the agenda.
So you'll take her minutes
unless-
and then you guys will prepare the resolutions?
We'll put the agendas together. Linda will do the minutes at the meeting unless Linda feels otherwise, and we haven't had that discussion yet.
I really don't need any more work, so.
But of course, we will have to evaluate staffing needs when we get into the budget, because, you know, this has put more work on Linda's office and less work on our office, so we're going to be looking at that issue.
Well, the only question I had on that is that Chris was doing both the minutes and the resolutions, so she was present she was present to hear the discussion and took those notes, and then it probably helped her being present to do the resolution.
She's probably watching.
But
That's why Linda's going to do the minutes.
I understand that, but if Linda's going to do the minutes and your staff is going to do the resolutions, then I'm just saying that what helped Chris do the resolutions was being present during the meetings. You know, but she's just going to have to either play back, if she's got questions on a resolution, how to put those together, she'll either have to rely on the minutes, the minutes just to factually just hit the minutes and the resolution, or play back the meeting. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, and we're working through all that. They're going to have their first meeting on it today.
Okay.
It's not going to be clean, but we'll figure it out.
Okay, all right.
The next item is, you had given us permission to meet with Garfield Township to talk about the tax delinquencies and the Michigan Tax Tribunal appeals. We met with Chuck Korn and his staff, along with city staff, about a week ago, and we had a good discussion about that issue. And I think there's more work to be done. Chuck is going to call a meeting with some of the larger township supervisors and myself and the city to just have a general discussion of what and how the county might be willing to help, or how we could be of help. It was a very constructive meeting. They were very appreciative about the fact that the county had an interest in this. Good discussion, and basically, you know, what they said was, you know, we've been stipulating for a lot of years on these issues, and it's something that they have a concern about. I think we saw the top 10 taxpayers in Garfield Township currently has $27 million in appeals pending. You know, their answer was, you know, some of these we would like to challenge, but we don't always have the staffing or the time or the money to do that. So it's an issue we're still talking about. We had a very constructive meeting.
Commissioner Thomas.
You better include all the townships.
Right after we meet with a couple of the big ones, Dick, we're going to the Township Association meeting and have a discussion with everybody.
The little ones, you know, the utilities like to go after them too.
Well, one of the real things, that's a great point, Commissioner. One of the things that we think has great potential, we use the example of Family Video. Family Video, just as a corporation, appealed all their assessments. They're in 5 different townships, or 3 townships and 2 in the city, I believe. Maybe it's 4 and 1. But those are the kinds of things, or the gas companies, the utilities, where if we were able to look at them together and, you know, focus on them together and bring all the townships in the city together and look at the appeal, we might be able to do it much more cheaply, and we might be able to do it much more effectively. This is what I think there were a number of counties, 10 or 15 counties did with one of the gas companies several years ago, and in fact, I think that's going on in Cherryland right now. So, you know, good start to this discussion.
I have a remark. Whitewater Township last night, they read into the minutes your administrator's report under the tax tribunal paragraph that you put. And, you know, it's not often you go to a township meeting and they're singing praises over Grand Traverse County and the Board of Commissioners. You know, it's always, you know, what have you done for me lately? So, they appreciated our interest and appreciated, our willing to look into it. One of the remarks was, and something to think about, Dennis, is that you're right, the townships, and you're right, they're spending all the money, but they probably have the least amount of money to return. But one of the remarks was, maybe how this could evolve is that all the taxing agencies somehow can get together. You got the schools, you got the college, you've got, us and everybody else that's on that list. And, we're all benefiting from the township's expenditure, and, maybe it's a situation where we can get some kind of ad hoc coordinated meeting with all the taxing agencies and maybe come up with a strategy, and maybe we all kick in a pool. Maybe that's the way to go.
That's exactly what
They won't do it.
Well,
The schools won't do it.
we're going to attempt to talk to them.
I think you got to talk to them.
That's our plan, Commissioner.
Different times now, so maybe a different seasons.
Well, it is different times, and that was what was brought up at the meeting. The schools are losing revenue too, and while a lot of it's reimbursed from the state, at some point in time, they're seeing their dollars go down, and there may be a change that takes place, but they still have debt and
Now-
other things.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Now, their regular funding, their operational funding, it wouldn't be affected by the local tax tribunals because it's through the state, but their capital millage would be affected.
Absolutely.
correct?
And, ultimately, their local funding is affected by what happens in assessments across the state. Obviously, it's a bigger issue, but
Right.
the less revenue the state has, the less that they're going to get reimbursed, and so they're seeing that.
Many years ago, before the schools were funded the way they are now from the state, it was the same thing. When there was a tribunal, the township had to handle it.
Yep.
It's just always been that way.
Let me just say that I think the best argument we can give is to show them graphically, financially, what's at risk for them. And, it may be a little bit, but on the other hand, I'd like to make the case that whatever percentage they directly get, let's say, for example, if they only get 2% of the money directly, maybe they put in 2% of whatever the contribution is. There's a lot of ways to look at it, but the first step here, Chuck wanted to get some of the larger townships together with the city, which I'm glad to do, and we'll probably do that in the next week. Then we would go to the Township Association, have a discussion with all of them. Then we would bring in all of the tax entities, Beta, everybody, and have a discussion with them. And then we'd see if there was a way to devise some kind of a system that might be workable. I don't anticipate that it would just be the county that would be helping, but that all those units would have some responsibility and involvement in it. But this is not a process that'll be done in a month or two. This is going to take some time to develop. But I think if we had something in place for next year, that would be a very good start. So we're working on it.
Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess my point would be, this is going to be more of a benefit to those appeals that affect multiple townships, multiple jurisdictions. It's not going to be, my building in Long Lake Township that I'm appealing. It's going to be the family videos, the utility companies. The utility companies, as you remember from Lori's list here a couple weeks ago, are some of the biggest taxpayers in Grand Traverse County, and they pay to all of the governmental entities. And what you're seeing now is I think Cherryland, for example, is appealing all of their assessments throughout the counties, and not just Grand Traverse County. And the problem is when the townships stipulate to those assessments and say, okay, we'll just back down to their amounts, okay, then when they go to the tax tribunal, they can say, well, look, in Grand Traverse County, 3 of the townships said this is fine. Why are these other places on our tail for it? So, particularly if the bigger townships, Garfield's in the city of Traverse City and East Bay, if they stipulate to it rather than fight it, then what chance does the smaller township have of even beginning to win in a tax tribunal situation?
They don't have any chance.
They don't have.
And the utilities set their own assessments. When they do their personal property tax return, they send it in and they appeal it.
They tell us how much money they've invested.
Yep. And then they turn around and appeal it.
Yep.
They're on their own numbers.
Any other follow-up comments?
Go ahead.
Last week, I had an opportunity to meet with Niall Deems of Varnum. Niall was the attorney that was hired by the property owners to do the evaluations of property values and the riparian issue on the Boardman Pond. And the board some time ago directed me to go ahead and start to evaluate that. So Niall and I had what I considered a very good meeting, a very positive meeting. And at the conclusion of that, our suggestion was that we bring him back up here to meet with the county board and to kind of have a discussion with the county board, because this is a different county board. Now, I think most of you who were running for office at the time, the newer commissioners, were attending those meetings of the Boardman Dam group. But we need to come up with some kind of a strategy to try to move this issue forward, both on behalf of the property owners and behalf of the citizens of the county. So I'm suggesting that at a meeting that's appropriate, sometime in March perhaps, we bring Niall up here, just to have a general discussion with you about his findings when he did the research, and then to talk to you about strategy of how we might engage the property owners in discussions about the values and the riparian right issues and those kinds of things. Quite frankly, one of my concerns is as we move forward on this issue, the dam removal, the dam's removal, that if we don't engage in those discussions with property owners soon, that what will happen is we'll go through the whole process, and then when we get ready to deconstruct dams, we'll end up in court for 2 years arguing these issues out with property owners. And I think it makes sense that we get that on the table now. We start seeing, first of all, where the county board is at on it, and then we start taking actions that are appropriate to work that issues through with the property owners. I think we need someone, I've talked with Al Schneider, he agrees, we need someone with that kind of expertise. And since this firm and Niall has done all of the background and done all the research on the 27 properties, it seems that they are the most appropriate to kind of take that on. So if it's okay with the board, I'd like to bring them up sometime in March. The good thing about these meeting every week all together is you're all here, and really we can pick just about any meeting that he's available when we have some time to talk with him. And he really just wants to have a discussion with you to see where the county board is at on this issue. Commissioner Hooper.
I think it's a great idea. I think we need to get this up in the air and open for most of the county residents, because there's still, property owners are still contending that that is not the only way to go, that this evaluation by Niall deems is just one lawyer's opinion. And they've got people from the Mackinac Center that are supporting them, that they're saying the government has usurped property rights, that they're taking it away from people unjustly. And I think the more we get this out, the more we get discussed in the public eye, then I think that's the better for the county and for the residents.
All right, any other comments on that?
I think we talked a little bit about this last April, didn't we, after the vote for the Boardman Dams, is, you know, kind of seeing what the options are with that property, correct?
Yep. And this is, obviously this is a strategy on the most appropriate way to address this issue that the board needs to develop, and that, of course, staff is here to help with. And I think that it's really a strategic decision on how we move forward, and it has to be one that the county board is comfortable with.
Okay.
The next item is I just wanted to point out to the board that the county sponsored a webinar through ICMA last week for key city personnel and county personnel. It was called Adapting to the New Normal. It was talking about the budget issues that we have, performance measurements, managing budgets under new systems. It was an extremely valuable presentation. It lasted about 2 hours. There were questions and answers afterwards. From our staff, we had Don, Dean, Danny, Jen Seaman, myself, John Syke in the meeting, and the city had the city manager and several representatives too. The people that put on the seminar were from Colorado, I believe, Jefferson County, Colorado. They kind of pioneered the idea of budgeting for outcomes. I'm getting a copy of the CD that I will make available for commissioners who may want to watch this. It was very positive, and I'm quite excited about how it might have implications here in Grand Traverse County, for example. So I look forward to providing that to you and then talking to you further about how we might begin to engage this program. Next item is, we just wanted you to be aware, if you weren't, that Bob Osterhout is going around to all the townships in the city to discuss the solid waste issue and this possibility of bidding out services. I guess we were surprised, and I guess I'll say somewhat dismayed over the fact that Garfield Township has already kind of made some decisions, at least preliminary decisions for their residents and negotiated with the haulers. I understand it from a township perspective, but we were kind of hoping that everybody was going to kind of come together on this. So Bob is going out to try to assess what kind of an interest there is. And I think I can fairly summarize that so far what he's hearing is we don't want to put any tax on our people. Our people want to have choices, and there so far has not been a lot of move to say we want to kind of come together and bid something out together. But that may change. He's only been to a few of the townships at this point in time, and I'm hoping that it will change. But I want you to be aware he's out there. He's working on that. Originally, we had hoped to go back to the Board of Public Works in February, but instead what they've done is they've sent him out to meet with all the local units of government. He'll prepare his analysis at the end of that, and then he'll provide that to the Board of Public Works, and of course I'll get copies for you as well, and then we'll kind of see where that goes. I think you know this, but there's a green energy team that we established in the county. We had one before when we worked with Seeds on doing our carbon footprint analysis. With this grant that we got from the COG for about $49,000, we're required to put the green energy team back together. We're working on that. We are going to assess the needs that are out there for the county. This will be about $48,000 or $49,000 for improvements that we can use in the county. Remember, we got some $550,000 in federal grants. $250,000 went to a lighting project. The other $300 and some thousand went to, $600 and some thousand. I think the number that's going to come for county and city improvements was $360,000 roughly. But this is additional money, and I'm kind of thinking what we can earmark this money for, and this is just my thoughts preliminarily, is improvements, efficiencies to the septic treatment plant. There are some variable speed motors that we can put in, some other things that have been recommended to the engineer, and we're going to look at trying to do some things there to cut the utility cost at the septic treatment plant. But the team is in place, we're working with the COG, we'll go through the complete evaluation, and then we'll be bringing to you some ideas of how we might use that money that's in there for a grant for us. I'm working with Nate Alger, with the help of Commissioner Friend and Sheriff Bensley. We had a meeting to discuss special police services, and for those of you for all of you here now, I'm trying to instill at Al Schneider's request, the term that we use for these contracts we have with local units of government is special police service contracts. He's trying to make a distinction between that and community policing, okay? And so we're going to always call these now special police service contracts. We are working on developing a policy for how the board and the sheriff might utilize special police service contracts, and I will have that for you at the Public Health and Safety meeting in 2 weeks, a policy that I hope the sheriff is in agreement with, that we can present to you as a policy for your consideration. So I wanted you to be aware of that. VA is having discussions with us about expanding their facilities. They're out of room here in Traverse City. We have had lots of discussions with them over the years about a VA health facility, a full health facility, and of course that's our end goal. It's obviously, the need has to be there has to be a desire, and people have changed in the VA's system so that we're working constantly with different people. But our goal is to try to get a full-blown facility here so we're not having to take veterans down to Ann Arbor, Saginaw, or Detroit for services. Their discussions with us last week were not about a much bigger facility. They were really about temporary space while they move the new office up here that's for psychological services, and we're going to offer them some space at the Lafreniere building temporarily until they can get their full staff, which I think is 10 to 12 people, up and running. But we did reiterate again the desire to have a comprehensive health clinic here in the Traverse City area. We understand that their preliminary report kind of indicates that they may be looking at the Grayling area because it's geographically centered. There have been some studies done by Michigan State University that were presented to us several years ago that looked at the population of Michigan and extrapolated where the population areas of growth in Michigan would be over the next 20 to 50 years. Those clearly show that the growth is in the northwestern sector of the state for the upper half of the lower peninsula, and they center in the Traverse City area. So we're getting that information from Michigan State and putting together the analysis to present to the VA that really they should not be looking at geographic location, but they should be looking at population centers in terms of where they develop their facilities. And the reason, obviously, is because, you know, if you put it in the middle and 70% of the people have to travel farther, you know, it doesn't really, you want to put it in a place where the most people travel the least distance, and so that's going to be the argument we make to the VA. So we're still working with them on that. Early on, at the board's, with the board's concurrence, this was several years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we've even made overtures to them that we would find land, that we would build facilities for them if they were willing to sign a 30-year lease to pay the cost of those facilities, if we were going to be building a health center. We made it clear that the county, at that time anyway, was very supportive of doing whatever we could to get a full-blown health clinic in this area, and we should have discussions about that during strategic planning, just to reiterate or make sure that this county board feels the same. Understand that our theory there is that because of the way the federal government pays, which is extremely generous in terms of rents, they don't like to build buildings, but they're glad to pay very, very high rents to get buildings. What we're talking about is a concept where we would build to their specs, and the rents would cover the cost of the bond for the full life of the bond in a long-term contract, so there'd be no cost to county taxpayers to do such a thing. So we're still working with them, but right now they're focusing on this new psychological facility that they're going to be opening, and looking at some small space needs for us. Lastly, I just want to mention that you've probably all noticed that my staff has moved up to temporary space on the 3rd floor. Use the same phone numbers, same email addresses. I'm still down in the corner next to the plastic. I'll be here for about probably another 4 or 5 weeks until the move is complete. Right now they're finishing off IT. When IT is done, then IT will move from our final destination offices over there. Then they will be moving my staff over to our office and me up to our offices, which will be on this side of the building. So, you know, if you're looking for me, I'll be down here. The rest of the staff is upstairs, and I'm getting my exercise as they are, back and forth, you know. But there will be some disruption, and hopefully we won't lose anything in the communication lines for the next several weeks. That's all I have.
Like those puzzles my kids have where you move one piece and then you
That's
move
exactly what it is, and you know, I think it's really important for the board to realize, the reason that we're doing it this way is because we're reusing everything. The reason we had to move our staff upstairs is because the walls that aren't going to be used down here are being used upstairs. We didn't buy new stuff, we're just reusing, and so we got to do it in pieces to get it done.
Mr. Thomas?
Did the Coast Guard send you any information so that we can do that letter?
They have not, Commissioner, I've been waiting for it.
Okay.
Anything else for Dennis? All right, moving on to unfinished business. We don't have any items. That leads us to new business. We have the issue of the senior center. We have Commissioner Richardson and Max Bauer. Commissioner,
Okay.
take your pleasure.
Go ahead.
All righty. You have a memo in your packet from Commissioner Richardson and myself, and I want to update everyone that at the at the February Commission on Aging board meeting, the Commission on Aging board expressed their frustration that we are not moving faster towards putting this issue on the ballot. I did speak with George. I apologize, but I did leave the Commission on Aging board meeting early on that day. The meeting starts at 10. I left at 11 because I was headed to Grand Rapids for a Parks conference. So I was not a participant in this discussion, but I did talk to Georgia Durga about this yesterday, the Director of Commission on Aging. And she reiterated that she does feel that this is a good fit with the Commission on Aging. She also said that she and Lori Wells, the department head for the senior center, and Lori's staff of one, Pat, met with Jennifer Siemens, our new HR director, and Jennifer is apparently working on putting a proposal together for Lori and Pat, and because clearly the city and the senior center needs to be on board before the county moves forward. What I would like to hear from this board is their commitment to continue exploring this and to continue moving forward in this direction, because certainly we do not want to add any more staff time. We don't want to add any more of commissioners' time, department heads' time to this issue unless this board is willing to continue moving forward in this direction.
Commissioner, please.
You know, I'm fully supportive of Commission on Aging taking over the Senior Citizen Center, but not the physical location. I think it's totally inappropriate, improper. There's a very large lack of parking down there. That piece of property is waterfront property. The senior citizens, I've never seen one out there bathing in the bay. I think if we're going to do something like this with the city, perhaps we should consider another location and go ahead and do the deal. But it's just like our library here in the city. I'm disappointed every time I go there, and I go there once a month for a beta meeting. There's absolutely no parking. We have beautiful landscaping, but there's no place to park. And people are out walking in the back through the deep snow. In the summertime, they're walking across the grass, and they're parking off premise because there's no parking. And the situation down there is the same, you know. All that is a building, and they have the shuffleboard courts. I think that we could find a building, there's a lot of buildings available, that would be much more suited for perhaps something like that, and we could move or build the shuffleboard courts at the new location where it's a lot easier for a senior who still drives to attend any function down there.
Commissioner Richardson.
Larry, I agree with you that, you know, the question of location and the building and everything has to be addressed, but I think we're looking at this as, you know, one step at a time, and I think the first step is, you know, really creating, you know, a countywide senior center which can provide services beyond that physical location. I mean, that is one of the points of this whole process, is to provide the services that, you know, seniors are getting at that senior center throughout the county, and that includes, you know, Kingsley and Fife Lake and Interlochen and Long Lake and so forth. One thing we discovered when I was on COFAC, that group that was looking into city finances a couple of years ago, was that many people regard that the senior center in this location with great affection, more than is really, in my mind, maybe justified by the building itself. But I think the first thing is to put it under, you know, strong footing, solid footing, by having the Commission on Aging running it, and then hopefully then we can start looking at the issue of what we do with the building and where that would be and so forth.
Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess, you know, maybe I've missed something along the way, but I don't believe that we've seen a formal proposal for the county to take this over, or formal ballot language to fund it. You know, so maybe you know, you can't blame us for not moving forward because we haven't
No, we're not.
You know,
We're not.
I thought maybe I dozed off there for a minute.
No, we're not saying that.
You know, I too have a lot of issues with the location and the physical facility. I certainly support the concept of a countywide senior center that's available, and senior center services, whether it's one facility or half a dozen facilities. I believe that a countywide program, if you would, makes a lot of sense. You know, I have a lot of issues when I read this packet that talks to me about that the county will assume responsibility for maintaining the building. You know, this is an old building. You know, I certainly wouldn't justify any commitment of county funds for that building without it, at bare minimum, having an energy audit and Danny Brown inspection of a facility.
Commissioner Maxbauer.
Danny Brown actually has already inspected the building, hasn't he, Dennis?
Yes.
And the other point I want to make is, the idea that the county will assume responsibility for maintaining the building, period, that really needs to be worked out with the city yet, and I would not recommend that without some type of cap or language that says that anything over the funding that the millage might provide is covered by the city, because really it is their property. These are details that just are not worked out yet. Now, as far as the ballot language goes, before we involve the county prosecutor and staff, we really kind of wanted to hear from this board whether or not we should begin that process.
Commissioner Thomas.
Well, I'm not opposed to it, but I'll never go along with anything till the millage is in place.
Commissioner-
I'm not going to stick our necks out for something and may end up paying for it.
Commissioner Richardson.
Sonny, you make a lot of good comments, and Dick, I totally agree with you. I mean, a lot of it is figuring out what the details are going to be before we put the millage on the ballot. If you look at this memo, it was dated January 13th. We were going to make a presentation on this last month, but then got delayed because of some snags. And I probably could have rewritten the memo, but didn't. I didn't necessarily, wasn't sure it was going to be in the packet or not. And I'm sure Dennis, has some comments on this. But one of the things that has happened since this memo was written is that there's been more discussion about actually just paying the city rent for the building and letting the city maintain the facility, make them responsible for the building, and we just run it from them. I think that's something that Dennis in particular prefers. And, I don't know, maybe if you want to address some of this.
They're really, first of all, we're making an assumption here at the direction of the commissioners that are on the committee. Remember, you established a committee to work on this, and it was Commissioner Richardson and Max Bauer and Stepka. The assumption is whatever the costs associated with this expansion are will come out of the millage. That's the assumption that's always been made, and I think that's what we're working under. I have two issues, and the one is the salary issue, and the second one is the building improvements, and I agree with Commissioner Richardson. I mean, I think the best thing for us to do is, rather than put county millage dollars into a city facility, it's better to pay a fair and equitable rent to the city and let the city maintain responsibility for maintaining that building. Even though we've done a pretty good assessment of it, I think that's a safer way to go, but we have to negotiate that. I've had some meetings with the city manager, but we thought we should come back and talk to you first. The salary issue is a little bit more complicated in that their current senior center director makes in excess of $7,000 more than our Commission on Aging director. And I can't be in a position, I think, where an employee is making more money than the supervisor, and so we're trying to work through that. And Commissioner Max Bauer, what Jen Seaman is doing is she's evaluating where the senior center director would fit under the county compensation plan. She's also looking at where our director would fit under our compensation plan with the responsibility of managing and overseeing a senior center and those employees. And so when we get those numbers, then we'll have some better numbers to look at. But even if those numbers don't work out, because that's a long-term employee with the city who's on a defined benefit plan, different, insurance and that kind of thing, we came up with this idea that I think you guys agree with about maybe a contract with the city, and the city still handles those employees, and we contract with the city to run that. But maybe it'll all work out in a different way. But those are the two sticking issues, and if we can get by that building issue, I think it's just the salary issue that we have concern with. But we have always tried to do this in a way that, assuming it'll come in under the millage request, so that there'll be no county dollars.
Commissioner Flees.
I agree with Dick. I think we need a millage in place first, but I think we should take our time, and I think we should establish a building elsewhere, and perhaps to do all of this, we'd need 2/10 of a mil for the first couple of years or something. But what I envision as one of the first baby boomers is a center where there's a lot of activities, and it's a large enough center to accommodate the upcoming baby boomers, which there's a lot of. And when we include this in a county-wide basis, you're going to have a lot more people coming. And that facility down there, I'm very familiar with it. It's totally inadequate for what I would envision, even on a short term. Plus, there's always the tendency, if we take it over, we rent it, doesn't make any difference, we'll be stuck there 5 to 10 years. I would just soon take another year, if it takes that long, do it in one fell swoop, and have a nice facility that would accommodate everybody. And you got to remember, seniors, and I've worked a lot of hours down in that area for various city activities, and seniors, sometimes their driving habits are not the best. So, and with that congestion you have down there, it's really a dangerous situation.
You drive like old people.
Commissioner Friend.
So, I'm going to just take a step back a little bit from the details. And what I'm looking at, from the best that I can tell, the two problems with the current situation are that with the funding that's in place, you have, number one, some townships that are not participating.
Correct.
Okay, so that creates a problem. And then you also have, that's an inequity in the funding, but compounding that inequity in the funding is the city's substantial contribution to running that, this is something they chose to operate years ago, and it's become inequitable funding because the percentage that they fund into it doesn't necessarily equate with the number of city residents using it versus people who are not city residents, right?
Yes.
So non-participating townships and inequity in the city's funding. So those are the two problems that we're trying to address. And I guess the way I'm looking at it is before you go out to ask the taxpayers for a millage and more money, are there other ways to address it? Now, when I've asked that, I know Georgia had talked with Dean about, can the Commission on Aging currently operate it? That's not exactly what I was trying to get at, because obviously if you take the total budget, the Commission on Aging would only be able to run it for a specified period of time, a year, 2 years, and then they would exhaust that funding to run the entire program. What I was more looking at is, can the Commission on Aging currently afford to participate in what would be an equitable funding solution? Is there, instead of doing basically a county takeover of the services and the operation, is there room for an intergovernmental agreement between the townships, the city, and the county? That we combine that and deal with those inequities of the funding.
You're opening up a big can of worms there because
because
of the township that have their own senior center.
So with the point that you're making, that is, it's difficult to negotiate and get participation in an intergovernmental agreement to equitably fund the senior center, right? Right. That's what I'm hearing. And I guess what I'm saying is, do we go to the voters because of our lack of ability to negotiate or exhaust that option?
Dennis.
Well, I just want to point out one thing, that the Commission on Aging this year, I believe, is giving $45,000 to the senior center. So there is a county contribution to that senior center of $45,000.
Yep.
Well, go ahead, Commissioner Max.
I just wanted to expand on that. One of the reasons that the Commission on Aging Board did elect to give $45,000 to the senior center was to expand programs throughout the county. That's the sole purpose of what that money was for. And that is also one of the things, aside from the problems that the senior center has, that is one of the other goals that the Commission on Aging Board wants to do, is expand those senior services throughout the county and also give the senior center reliable funding. And we're not asking, the Commission on Aging Board is not asking for a great deal of money. 0.1 mil, is about, what, $440,000 a year?
A little over 400,000.
A little over 400?
Yeah,
But your points are well taken.
And I understand the degree of the millage. However, to me, you're still reaching out to those taxpayers before we've exhausted a resolution that's within our means.
Commissioner Wheelock, and then I'll have a comment.
I guess the comment, I think, I take a little exception with the comment that the way to give them stable funding is for the county to do it. I believe currently the city is funding the senior center, correct?
Yes.
And the seniors, or the funding becomes more stable if the county does it than if the city does it? I just don't quite see why, because they're concerned that if their question is the funding.
No.
If it's just the mechanism that the city's not funding it, so now it automatically drops back to the county's responsibility, I have a problem with that, too.
No, what I meant was, when I said reliable funding, is any commission, any board from their general fund has discretion every year on the budget, and a millage truly is more reliable funding. Plus, it gives the voters an opportunity to speak whether or not they want to support the senior center or not.
The funding right now of the Traverse City Senior Center is like a combination of government units, private donations, fees, etc. Cities, it's about a $250,000 budget. City's putting in $100,000 of that. Commission on Aging is putting in some money, as we've heard. Other townships are putting in about $55,000 to $60,000, but that's all, voluntary kind of, are you going to do it? Townships have participated and then dropped out and so forth. Meanwhile, the center is used by residents throughout the county. I think a study was done, only like 23% of the people who are actually using the senior center were actually city residents, even though the city was putting in, the largest share. The idea of moving it to the Commission on Aging and supporting it with a millage is to provide a countywide service that is used by residents countywide. The issues that we presented, between the county and the city on the county taking this over, hopefully are all things that are going to be resolved before we put a millage on the ballot, so that everyone, the city knows, the county knows, all the residents know exactly what the deal is going to be before we ask people to vote on it. Is this something that you feel deserves, a small tax to support? And that's pretty much where it comes from.
Commissioner Hooper.
Okay, now, as you guys saying a small tax, but right now we have a county road commission millage coming up. You have a renewal for the Commission on Aging, right?
Right.
And then you want to put this on top of that. And so these aren't small taxes in cumulative effect.
Well, each one is taken individually.
I don't think so.
Well, no, I think, the voters, first of all, the Commission on Aging renewal is going to be on the August ballot. The road commission millage is going to be on the November ballot, and if we put this one on the ballot, we would recommend that it would go on the November ballot also. It's democracy. The voters decide, is this worth spending money for?
Commissioner Friend.
And I agree with that. As a matter of fact, that's when the problem I had in East Bay when at first they voted down the millage. Let the people choose whether or not they want to support the millage. But the distinction that I make with this millage is that the voters may not realize that that what they're voting on this, not just to have it, but because that level of intergovernmental agreement really hasn't been exhausted. So
But there is no intergovernmental agreement. There isn't really an intergovernmental agreement.
There hasn't been an approach to really gain that intergovernmental agreement, that intergovernmental support for that. And, the Commission on Aging millage is in August. It is a renewal. The Road Commission millage, whether you're for it or whether you're against it, let the people vote on it. And I don't have an issue with that because, number one, they are seeing decreased funding. They're seeing decreased funding. The other thing is a part of that millage money will go for road repair where they have no other resource to gain those funds. They can't assess for it. They can't use MTF funds for it. They have no other way to get those funds. And that's where I make the distinction with with the senior center millage. You know, it's obviously supportive of the Commission on Aging, and I think the senior center is a worthwhile endeavor. Guess what I'm saying is that I think we should exhaust this other approach before going to the voters. And like you say, you know, let people decide, let them voice their opinion. But, you know, intergovernmental agreement doesn't say that they can't voice their agreement. They have an ability to contact their township, their village, their city, their county commissioner, and say, hey, I want you to put a deal together that doesn't use extra voted millage.
Well, I guess I have a comment. I don't want to discard your comment, because maybe it's a question we need to ask. But everybody knows township budgets are as tough as ours, and they're looking every way to try to figure out how they can save money or reduce expenses. And this is kind of a voluntary thing on their part, the ones that are doing it. And, you know, the townships that are not funding it, I can't see that we're going to be able to talk them into funding it. Personally, that's just my opinion. I think the townships that are kicking in, this whole concept that has been brought up in terms of putting it on the ballot and removing them from the volunteerism of kicking in, they're all pretty happy about. I mean, I think that's positive news that they've heard, that they've expressed, at least to me at the township board level, is that, you know, if that's indeed the conceptual thing, that would really help us out, and it would be a more fair distribution. So, you know, maybe this is during our township joint meeting, we can just, you know, if we got time, we can throw it up in the air and just say, hey, listen, how does everybody feel about this thing? Or, you know, if we got good representation, do you feel that your township board might want to come together and put an agreement together, or do you feel strongly that, you know, the millage is probably the better way to go?
Did you just say, can I ask you a question to clarify? You just said that when you've been at the township meetings, it's the township boards that have been, you know, in favor of this approach?
They see, the ones that have communicated to me, you know, when I've made the report that we're possibly going to put this on the ballot, and there's possibility of some kind of city-county arrangement with a senior center, and there's some discussion about the feasibility of putting something on the ballot, potentially in November. Their remark back to me was that would be great for townships, because we're really struggling in our budget. This would be more of a consistent way to fund a senior center. And, you know, the public has been very supportive of senior center issues, so likelihood of passing they think is good. And that would hopefully relieve them of that contribution they're making and make it more of a distribution, you know, from the county level,
sure,
you know, from the taxpayer level. So I think we're going to have, not that I don't disagree with an interlocal agreement concept, I think it's just going to be just tougher to sell, to be honest with you.
So it's not surprising that they would be supportive, because they can take that off of their budget line
Exactly.
item and shift that to the taxpayer.
Yeah, and I think that's what they would be thinking. Commissioner Fleeks.
Just a little food for thought, as I assume we're going to leave this topic, but to move it along or expedite it, perhaps we could rent a building at a more centrally located area that's larger and would better fit the use, and because I think the location is really going to be a big seller in this, and I think when it comes to a millage for seniors, the seniors really turn out for that stuff. And like I said, right on the edge of the baby boomer, and it's going to get bigger, it's not going to get littler, so it's not a problem or anything that's going to go away, and I think we ought to plan it properly. But to expedite it rather than buying a building or something like that, if we were looking at renting the senior citizen center, paying the city rent, perhaps we could do it at another building.
Well, I think that, I want to play off Commissioner's, I believe it was Commissioner Friend that had previously stated that, and I agree with her concept that, you know, whatever we're going to do, whatever arrangement we're going to have, if it affects county dollars, we should have, number one, a business plan, number two, a condition report on the building, number three, what it's going to take for capital costs for improvements. We ought to have a projection or pro forma on it, so we know exactly what we're walking into in terms of trying to allocate dollars to pay for it. So, I think before we get into a vote on this thing, I mean, I'm happy to move forward with the conceptual the situation we've got going now to come back with a recommendation. But I think when they come back with a recommendation, I think we've got to have some financial data to support the recommendation.
I appreciate that. I think it was Commissioner Wheelock those suggestions were in Commissioner
I
Wheelock's.
think we will be getting that information. Some of this has already been done. And Larry, if I can address your comments about, a new building again. One of the reasons that I feel we need to structure this the way we're doing it, which is to first ask the question about whether the senior center should be a county-wide program instead of just a city program, is because I think if we throw in the question about the building or moving it at the same time, then you're going to lose support for the people who like it where it is, who are using it now. I just think we need to separate those questions, or we stand a very good chance of losing it completely. That first ask the question is, should this be a county-wide program instead of a city program? And if we get past that and it does become a Commission on Aging program supported by a county millage, then we can start talking about, the building question. Because I have a building fund. I've been talking about building a new building, somewhere. And that's something that, it's just, basically I'm trying to say it's a question for another day.
The Senior Citizen Center has been there for years and years, and I'll just go back to 68 because I know it for a fact. In 1968, you couldn't purchase a car outside the corporate limits of the city of Traverse City. There wasn't a hardware except in village of Kingsley and Fife Lake other than within the corporate limits. 1968, that Senior Citizen Center was easy to get to. You didn't have near the traffic, and we've had a lot of changes since then. I think just the senior citizens' health is at risk down there, and I would say just go down and look at the buildings in that area and look at the black that gets on them from the automobile exhaust, and I can't imagine that sucking up all them fumes are any good for anybody. And go down there and stand, and I have for hours, right on that sidewalk in front of senior citizens, and let me tell you, you might as well be smoking cigarettes.
Okay, any other comments on this thing? Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess, we're not going to beat this to death this morning, but I think the thing about it, we probably already did. The thing about it is, I think the conceptual question is, does this board support a county-wide senior center concept? If we conceptually support that, then we continue to move forward, which I think we all are in agreement. I think the discussion, like Russ said, of where it is, whether it's this building, whether it's a different building, whether it's 6 places throughout the county, that's a completely separate discussion. I think, at least in my mind, I conceptually support the idea of a countywide program, but one thing that you need to remember, that if you put this on a ballot and you haven't educated the people very thoroughly about what you're going to do, and the voters tell you no, then you better not be spending taxpayer dollars to provide a program that they told you they don't want.
No.
So, spend the time, whether it's in November of this year, whether it's in November of next year, whenever it is, make sure that you have concrete outlines of what you're going to do, where you're going to do it, and how much it's going to cost.
I'm wondering, like you said, is it a priority to provide senior center services or senior services within the county? And obviously it is, and the Commission on Aging has decided that, and that's why they're putting that funding towards that. So that problem is being addressed. What I further see this truly is what are we doing about the problem that isn't addressed is the inequitableness of the funding and it being largely burdened by the city. So are we truly just solving the city's inequality of their funding for their senior center?
Interesting question. Okay. Commissioner Richardson, Commissioner Maxbauer, do you feel comfortable that
well, I guess...
Do you want a motion, or are you happy with the consensus discussion?
What do you think, Dennis?
I think there's consensus here that we should move forward and continue to develop it, and I think with that, I think we're fine. We can go ahead and finish the terms of it and bring it back.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that it's going to be the devil's going to be in the details. It's the details that are presented that's going to decide if how people can vote on it.
One thing you might want to do, just a thought, you might want to, we'll try to address that millage issue quickly, the language issue quickly, to get that back before the county board, so at least we could start working on the language and get that ready to go. But I think what you've always told me is you want to have the whole concept developed when the millage is ready to put on the ballot, so that the public knows what they're getting.
Yes, absolutely.
So this board knows what it's.
And this board, of course.
That would be
So then,
I'm not putting it on the
so then
ballot
we
until I
are
know what we're doing.
foregoing any
Okay.
investigation of an intergovernmental cooperation. Answer my question?
No.
To the board? So then we are foregoing the or the possibility of an intergovernmental cooperation addressing the issues.
I don't sense a strong sentiment for that. And
I don't either.
honestly, if that's what you're going to do, the city could probably do that on its own and continue to run.
That's
the
my
city.
point. They
Just
should have been.
continue to- Well, they've been doing that.
I believe that letter's been sent to every township.
Yeah,
Excellent.
it has been.
Right.
Okey dokey.
That consensus, I believe.
All right. Okay, moving on, is there any other new business? Hearing none, we're going to move on to the second public comment. Hang on.
New business, new
I tried
business.
to shut her up, but she's waving.
Oh, you'd like new business?
I just wanted to mention
Yeah.
to the county board that the Parks and Rec Commission had a special meeting, and the sole purpose of the special meeting was to discuss baseball at the Civic Center.
Oh.
I got the consensus of the board at the time, although we tabled the motion, was to ask Grand Traverse County to take over the American Legion baseball program. This issue is going to be discussed at length tomorrow evening at our Parks and Rec Board conference meeting, a regular monthly meeting. And I just wanted this board to know that I would very much like to have whatever the discussion is tomorrow night, I would like to have this subject on our end-of-the-month board meeting for continued discussion, because if the Parks and Rec Board Commission decides to move forward and ask the Parks and Rec Department to take over American Legion Baseball, it will have an impact on the budget. Now, I do not know at this point what the Parks and Rec Board Commission is going to do. I will let everyone know that I had a conversation with Mark Greiner from the American Legion last night, and he said that he hopes to meet with the YMCA today and ask them to work with the American Legion in them taking over the baseball program. I don't know where this is going. I truly do not. So, but I would like to have it as a subject for discussion at the end of the month for our board meeting.
Okay.
Maybe you should have them take over the Lions, the Tigers, and the Red Wings too, and maybe you can get a winning team somewhere.
Well, just a comment on my part, the history of the county is, back as far as I got on the board a long time ago, is that, we developed these community partnerships. And, we help them, we support the facilities, they organize the events, they deal with collecting the money from these individuals, they put the programs together, they supervise the programs, and it's really worked out well. I think if the American Legion or whomever wants to come together and continue to run under that premise, I would rather have that type of arrangement where versus us getting involved in another situation where it involves more staff and those kinds of issues. So, I really support the structure and conceptual program we have right now, and that is, the partnership with the community. Commissioner Wheelock.
I guess, I too am concerned whether we, as Grand Traverse County, wants to run the baseball program. And I guess if American Legion, and I know we all are aware that, where there were issues with the American Legion program last summer, but it's a long-standing program that served this community well for a long time. I guess if if American Legion is not able to continue to run the program, I'd like to see what other community organizations are out there that may. You know, I too got off the phone with Mark last night. He has my cell phone speed dialed. You know, I know that one of the discussions, and Mark and I have had extensive discussions, which really isn't real necessarily pertinent here this morning, but is the fact that, you know, the average age of a member of the American Legion is almost 70 years old. Do they any longer, are they in a situation where they have the volunteers that can go out and coach these teams and those kind of things, you know? So maybe a cooperation with them in the YMCA or some other organization makes sense. You know, I guess I guess my primary point is, I don't believe, at least from my perspective, Grand Traverse County should be operating a youth baseball program.
Commissioner Max Bauer.
Well, first of all, I would like to hold off on having this discussion until after the Parks Board meets tomorrow evening. Second of all, I will tell you all right now that what I'm going to suggest to the Parks Board tomorrow evening is that we RFP this. And whoever makes the best proposal, and there may only be one, I don't know, whoever makes the best proposal based upon the RFP will take the program. And that would not eliminate the Parks Department from, you know, participating in the RFP process. But I don't know, again, how the Parks Board is going to go tomorrow evening, and so I would ask that we hold off on this discussion.
So you get a for-profit organization running it, perhaps?
I forgot to mention the Pistons are not.
Possibly.
Commissioner Fleece.
I agree with Sonny 100%. And the county to take over the baseball program, I think would really be a serious error. And the American Legion has had a change in leadership, and I think maybe a partnership with the Y would be good.
All right, we will move on to second public comment. There's no public available. Any other additional commissioner comments before we move on to notices?
These meetings certainly are quicker than
All
they
right,
used to be.
notices. Commissioner Fleece has an item.
At MTA meeting, the Township Association meeting earlier this month, Jack Pickard, who is the new Veterans Coalition Director, had asked Glenn Lyle to survey the townships that were present there, and there was pretty good turnout at Thursday regarding the 4th of July fireworks and funding for same, and all of the townships that were there that day, the township supervisors indicated, of course, they needed their board support, but they didn't think that was a problem, and they're going to participate. Yesterday, and I was at that meeting, but yesterday, Jack Pickard had a meeting with me, and he wanted me to talk to the board about the $5,000 contribution we've done in years past, and he's going to be making a formal request, and I told him I'd get it on the next Ways and Means agenda for the 4th of July fireworks. The Veterans Coalition, as I'm sure many of you know, last year had a lot of problems similar to that of the baseball and stuff, and they too have had a change in leadership, and I think you're going to see some distinct changes. So.
Okay, any other notices or announcements?
My calendar says we have a county budget process meeting at 10 o'clock on Friday, is that correct? We're still on schedule for that?
No.
No, I don't think so.
That got moved to...
All right, well,
22nd of May.
that's what I said, it's still on my calendar, that's why I'm asking the question, I haven't gotten any paperwork.
I don't know if it's been formalized, has it?
We don't have a date on that, do we?
I don't think we have a date on
We
it.
were to go through strategic planning and then go into the budget.
I thought something was picked at noon
Motion to adjourn?
on Sunday.
I will get you an email today explaining
Okay.
where we're at with that. I don't know
I
exactly.
just noticed it was still on my calendar, I hadn't gotten a packet for it, so I figured maybe I...
Thank you, Linda, and welcome.
All right, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone. 10:30.
I gotta get a haircut.
I have a 10:30.